Picture this. You're standing in a frozen field in late November, breath clouding in front of your face, watching the last of your turnip crop rot under a sheet of ice that appeared overnight. Your landlord's steward arrives on horseback, steam rising from the animal's nostrils, and tells you the king needs archers. Not asks, needs. The harvest failed. Winter came early. And somewhere 2 weeks' march north there's a border dispute that requires bodies with bows. You don't get to say no. Welcome to your new career as a medieval archer in the frozen forests, where your life expectancy just dropped from maybe 40 to probably next Tuesday. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Drop that in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You weren't born an archer, you were born a farmer, maybe a shepherd, possibly the third son of a miller who had no inheritance waiting. The longbow wasn't some romantic calling, it was conscription dressed up as opportunity. English law since 1252 required every able-bodied man between 15 and 60 to own a bow and practice regularly. Sounds noble until you realise practice meant Sunday afternoons, shooting at butts in the village while your fingers bled and your shoulders screamed all so the crown could pull you into service the moment crops failed and coffers emptied. The recruitment process was brutally simple. The sheriff's men arrived with writs. They assessed who could draw a bow without falling over. If you'd been shooting since childhood, and if you were English, you probably you were considered trained. Never mind that trained meant you could hit a straw target at 60 yards in summer sunshine. Winter warfare in hostile forests that was on-the-job training, and the job was staying alive. They promised payment. A few pence a day, plus equipment, plus a share of plunder if things went well. What they didn't mention, payment came months later. Equipment was whatever hadn't rotted in a warehouse, and plunder meant stripping frozen bodies of anything that might buy you an extra blanket. But you took the offer because the alternative was watching your family starve through a winter that had already killed the crops, the livestock, and your neighbour's youngest child. Historians still argue whether medieval military service was truly compulsory or technically voluntary with impossible social pressure. The answer depended on whether you were a freeman or a villain, whether your lord was desperate or merely greedy, and whether you preferred the word conscripted or strongly encouraged under threat of losing your tenancy. Semantics aside, you were going. The muster point was a 3-day walk. You left in early December, which meant dawn didn't arrive until nearly 8, and dusk came before 4. You walked with other recruits, some you knew, most you didn't, along roads that were really just frozen mud ruts. You carried your bow, which you'd probably made yourself from yew wood. You'd been seasoning for 2 years, plus whatever arrows you owned, plus a leather bag with a spare string, a knife, and the heel of bread your wife pressed into your hands before she turned away crying. Nobody told you where you were going, not specifically. North was the operational briefing. There was a forest. There were enemy Scottish raiders maybe, or Welsh rebels, or possibly just bandits that someone important wanted eliminated. The details were for nobles. Your detail was walking until told to stop, then shooting at whatever moved when told to shoot. The temperature dropped every mile north. Your breath froze on your collar. Your boots, stuffed with straw for insulation, developed holes that let in snow that melted against your skin, then froze again. You wrapped your hands in strips of wool, but wool stops working when it's wet, and between the snow and your own sweat, everything was always wet. On the second day of marching, you watched an older recruit, a man maybe 50 with the thick shoulders of a lifetime bowman, collapse in the road. Heart gave out. Or maybe he just decided stopping was easier than continuing. The column didn't pause. Someone took his bow. Someone else took his arrows. His body was left for the crows or the wolves or the cold, whichever arrived first. No ceremony, no prayer, just the crunch of boots continuing north. This was before you even reached the war. You started understanding that the forest wasn't where you'd fight. The forest was where you'd exist day after day, in a state of frozen misery that made actual combat seem almost appealing. Because at least battle meant movement, meant blood flowing fast enough to feel warm for a few minutes. The forest was the real enemy. The human opponents were just the excuse to drag you into it. By the time you reached the muster camp, a cleared area in the trees where 200 other archers stood around fires that never seemed to produce enough heat, you'd already lost feeling in 3 toes. You didn't mention this. Everyone had lost something. Complaining was like bragging about being ordinary. The captain was a minor knight who looked barely older than you. He gave a speech about honour and king and duty. Then he told you to check your equipment, get some sleep and be ready to march at dawn. The war was another week north, deeper into the forest, deeper into winter. You bedded down next to strangers, your bow beside you like a lover you'd grown to resent, and you dreamed of your turnip field under ice, a place that suddenly seemed impossibly warm and safe, even though it was the place you'd been desperate to escape just 6 days earlier. The longbow is 6 feet of yew wood that weighs about 3 pounds and feels like 30 by the end of the first day's march. You've been carrying it since you left the muster camp, and already you understand why archers develop that characteristic lean one shoulder perpetually higher than the other, the spine curved like a question mark. The bow doesn't fit anywhere convenient on a human body, too long to sling across your back without hitting your legs, too awkward to carry horizontally without smacking every tree and fellow soldier within arm's reach. So you hold it vertically in your left hand hour after hour while your fingers cramp, and your shoulder socket grinds and your neck muscles scream from compensating for the imbalance. The yew itself is both miracle and curse. English bowyers preferred wood from Italy or Spain, slow-grown mountain yew, with tight growth rings the heartwood providing compression strength, the sapwood providing tension. Your bow probably has both layers visible along its length, a pale stripe running down the belly, darker wood forming the back. It's beautiful in the way a gallows is beautiful, functional, elegant, and designed to deal death efficiently. The problem is that yew is also temperamental. It hates moisture. It despises cold. And winter forests offer both in quantities that would make a fish uncomfortable. You keep the bow strung because unstringing and restringing in frozen conditions risks snapping the string or cracking the nocks. But keeping it strung means constant tension on wood that's already stressed, which means the bow gradually loses power, loses its curve, loses the very properties that make it lethal. It's a losing game. Unstring it and risk not being able to string it when enemies appear. Keep it strung and watch it weaken daily. Medieval archers called this following the string, when the bow takes a permanent bend and never returns to its original curve. A followed bow loses 20, 30, even 40 pounds of draw weight. It becomes a stick that shoots arrows gently instead of lethally. Historians still argue whether archers carried multiple bows on campaign or simply accepted degradation as inevitable. Evidence suggests most carried one bow, plus maybe a backup if they were wealthy or paranoid. But wealth and paranoia weren't common among conscripted farmers, so you've got your one yew companion, and a growing certainty that it's dying slightly faster than you are. The cold affects everything. At night, when temperatures plummet below freezing the wood contracts, you can hear it sometimes tiny creaks and pops as the fibres compress, as moisture trapped inside freezes and expands in microscopic pockets. By morning the bough is different, stiffer, more brittle. The string made of hemp or linen waxed with beeswax to repel water has absorbed enough atmospheric moisture to lose its snap. You try to keep it dry by wrapping it in wool, by sleeping with the bow beside you, so your body heat might preserve something. But body heat in a winter forest is a theoretical concept. You're not generating warmth, you're just losing it slowly. Then there's the practical nightmare of moving through forest with a 6-foot weapon. The trees don't care about your military service. Branches catch the upper limb. Undergrowth tangles the lower. You're constantly twisting, angling, ducking, raising the bow overhead to slip through gaps that your body fits through, but your weapon doesn't. Other archers develop techniques carrying the bow horizontally at shoulder height, threading through the forest like a sideways crab. But horizontal carry means both arms engaged, which means you can't catch yourself when you slip on ice, can't grab branches for balance, can't do any of the 1,000 small adjustments that keep you upright on terrain specifically designed to break ankles. And God help you if you fall while holding the bow. The force of your body hitting the ground transfers through your hand into the wood. Maybe nothing breaks. Maybe you hear that sickening crack that means you're now carrying an expensive walking stick. Maybe the break is subtle, a fracture line you won't notice until you try to draw, and the bow explodes in your face, sending splinters into your cheek and leaving you defenseless while enemies close in. Archers learn to fall sideways, to twist mid-collapse, so the bow lands separately from the body. It's a skill nobody teaches you. You learn by watching others fail. The weight compounds mile after mile. 3 pounds becomes a psychological burden that manifests as physical pain. Your forearm burns. Your wrist aches with a deep grinding sensation that radiates into your elbow. By afternoon, your hand has cramped into a claw shape that doesn't fully release, even when you set the bow down for a water break. You shake your fingers, massage the palm, but the cramping returns the moment you pick up the weapon again. Some archers switch hands, carrying with the right instead of the left, but this creates new problems because your shooting hand isn't accustomed to load bearing. And besides, if you're attacked while the bow is in your wrong hand, you've got to transfer it mid-crisis while arrows are incoming. Nobody warns you that the bow becomes an identity marker. Enemies can spot archers from a distance by the way they move that distinctive lean, that careful navigation through obstacles, that protective posture around a 6-foot stick. You might as well be carrying a flag that says valuable target kill first, because archers are threats. Infantry might stab you in close quarters, but archers can kill from 150 yards out, can decimate formations before they close to sword range. Which means enemy archers aim for you. Enemy cavalry rides you down. Enemy infantry, if they capture you, do things that involve removing fingers so you'll never draw a bow again. The yew itself mocks you with its history. Yew trees grow in churchyards across England, some of them older than Christianity itself, their roots tangled with centuries of bodies. The wood is toxic, the leaves, the seeds, even the sawdust can sicken or kill. Bowyers work carefully, avoid breathing. The dust know that the same wood that gives them a livelihood can poison them slowly. You're carrying death in multiple forms. The bow can kill enemies at a distance. The wood itself can kill you through prolonged contact, and the weight of it, literal and metaphorical, is killing your body, piece by piece, vertebra by vertebra, mile by frozen mile. By the time you make camp on the 3rd night, you can't fully straighten your spine. You try to stretch, but your muscles have locked into carrying position. You'll sleep curved around your bow and you'll wake more curved. And by the end of this campaign, you'll be permanently shaped by the weapon you carry. If you survive long enough to go home, people will identify you as a veteran archer just by your silhouette. The bow will have marked you, claimed you, made you its creature, and you haven't even shot it yet. Your hands are the mechanism that converts will into violence, and in winter that mechanism freezes, literally. The physics of drawing a war bow require finger strength. Most modern humans can't comprehend. You're pulling somewhere between 80 and 120 pounds of resistance depending on the bow, depending on whether it's already followed the string, depending on how cold has degraded the wood. That's not a gym exercise. That's hauling a small person off the ground, using only 3 fingers of your right hand, while your left arm fights to keep a 6-foot lever steady. Now do it when you can't feel those fingers, when the skin has gone waxy and grey, when bending your knuckles feels like snapping frozen twigs. The medieval archer's draw technique uses 3 fingers, index, middle and ring, hooked around the string with the arrow knocked between index and middle. It's called the Mediterranean draw, and it places enormous pressure on fingertips that in winter have about as much flexibility as stone. You've wrapped your hands in wool strips, maybe even mitts with the fingertips cut away, but the moment you expose skin to draw the bow, cold rushes in like water through a cracked hull. The first draw of the morning is agony. Your fingers don't want to curl. The string feels like iron cable. Your hand shakes with effort and you're not sure if it's from the cold or the muscle strain or the first whispers of frostbite settling into the tissue. Historians still argue whether medieval archers used thumb rings or finger tabs for protection, like later Ottoman or Asian archers did. Most evidence suggests English longbowmen just developed massive calluses and accepted that their hands would be permanently damaged. Your fingers already have the horn-like pads from years of practice shooting, but calluses don't prevent cold injury. They just make you think you're tougher than you are until you realise you've been drawing with frostbitten fingers for an hour and didn't notice because everything was numb anyway. The cold affects draw weight in ways that make physics feel personal. As temperature drops, the U stiffens. What was a 90-pound bow yesterday might feel like 110 pounds this morning. Your muscles haven't gotten stronger overnight, they've gotten colder, tighter, less efficient. You're weaker and the bow is stronger, which means every draw is a negotiation between your body's limits and the weapon's demands. Some archers can't make full draw in extreme cold. They pull to 3/4, maybe 7/8, and shoot arrows that travel with less force, less range, less killing power. Better a weak shot than no shot, but also a weak shot might just wound an enemy, who then becomes a very motivated close-quarters problem. Your left hand, the bow hand, faces different torture. It's not pulling, it's pushing, bearing the full force of the draw while trying to keep the bow vertical and steady. In summer, this is manageable. In winter, your palm goes numb against the wooden grip within minutes. You lose proprioception, the sense of where your hand is in space. You think you're holding the bow level, but you're actually canting it 15 degrees, which means your arrow will drift right and miss by yards. You overcompensate, cant left, miss the other direction. Meanwhile, your forearm is cramping from the isometric hold and your shoulder is screaming because it's been locked in pushing position for so long that the joint has started grinding bone on bone. Then there's the issue of moisture. Your breath condenses, your sweat freezes. Any moisture on your hands turns to ice, and ice on fingers means you can't grip properly. The string slips. Or worse, your fingers stick to the string skin bonded to frozen hemp, and when you release, you tear flesh away. You've seen it happen to other archers. The scream, the blood on white snow, the man cradling his hand while the sergeant yells that he's got 9 other fingers and needs to keep shooting. Nobody stops for injuries that aren't immediately fatal. You learn to breathe away from your hands to avoid licking your lips because saliva freezes faster than sweat, to never ever touch metal with bare skin because flesh bonds to frozen iron in seconds. The repetitive motion compounds everything. One draw, one shot that's painful but survivable. 20 shots in rapid succession during a volley. That's when fingers start to fail structurally. The tendons in your forearm, the flexor digitorum profundus, if we're being anatomical about it, are working at maximum capacity in suboptimal conditions. They're cold, they're fatigued, they're trying to generate explosive force repeatedly while deprived of adequate blood flow, because your body has shunted circulation away from extremities to protect your core. Muscle fibers tear, tendons develop micro damage that won't heal properly in the field. Your hand tomorrow will be weaker than your hand today, and the day after weaker still until by week 2, You're drawing a bow with hands that feel like broken tools held together by habit and desperation. Some archers piss on their hands. Yes, really. Urine is warm, and warmth is currency in winter war. The ammonia might also provide some kind of antibacterial benefit, though medieval archers weren't thinking about germ theory, they just knew it helped. You're not there yet. You're still too proud, too disgusted, too convinced there must be a better way. Give it a week. You'll be pissing on your hands and thanking God you still have urine warm enough to feel. The psychological dimension is worse than the physical. Every time you draw the bow, there's a moment of uncertainty. Will your fingers hold? Will the string slip? Will your hand cramp mid-draw and leave you stuck at full extension, unable to release, unable to let down, safely just frozen in place like some medieval statue of suffering? It happens. You've seen it. A man draws his hand, locks. He stands there making noises that aren't quite screams, while others physically pry his fingers open and lower the string for him. His shooting career is probably over. Nerve damage, tendon rupture, something structural that won't be fixed by rest and prayer. And here's the cruelest joke: accuracy requires sensitivity. You need to feel the string, feel the arrow, feel the tiny adjustments in pressure that differentiate a good release from a bad one. But cold eliminates sensitivity. Your fingers are clubs. You're shooting by memory and hope, not by feel. The arrow could be knocked slightly wrong, you wouldn't know, until it helicopters off the string and tumbles uselessly into the trees. The string could have a weak spot about to snap. You wouldn't feel it until it whips across your forearm and opens a cut that will definitely get infected. You're operating a precision instrument with tools that have lost their precision, and people are expecting you to hit man-sized targets at 60, 80, 100 yards in falling snow with wind gusting, and your hands betraying you with every breath. You look at your fingers in the firelight that night. They're swollen, discoloured. The nails have gone purple at the edges. You try to make a fist and can't quite close it completely. This is day 3. The campaign is expected to last weeks. You do the math. The math suggests you won't have functional hands by the end. But the math also doesn't account for adaptation for the human body's ability to find new ways to hurt itself productively. You'll shoot. You'll draw. You'll pull that string until your fingers are permanently hooked into claw shapes that mark you as a bowman for life, if you live that long. They issued you leather armour, which sounds protective, until you realise leather in winter is just expensive cardboard that happens to freeze solid. The gambizon that quilted jacket stuffed with wool or linen scraps was supposed to be your primary defence, but the one they gave you smells like the previous owner died in it, which he probably did, and the stuffing has compressed into hard lumps that dig into your ribs like accusatory fingers. Over that goes a leather jerkin boiled and hardened into something approximating rigidity, with a breastplate section that's meant to stop slashing attacks. In summer, this might work. In December, it's like wearing a sheet of ice strapped directly to your chest. The logic seems sound at first. Leather is lighter than mail, cheaper than plate, and allows the shoulder mobility archers need to draw. Knights can lumber around in full harness, because they're fighting on horseback or in close formation, where movement is less critical. But archers need to run to kneel, to twist and aim and relocate quickly when the enemy figures out where you're shooting from. So leather, practical, sensible, completely unbearable. The cold turns the leather into something between wood and stone. Your jerkin doesn't flex, it cracks. Every movement produces sounds like breaking branches. You bend to pick up an arrow and hear your own armour protest with a sharp snap that makes everyone nearby flinch, thinking you've been shot. The leather against your neck rubs skin raw because it can't conform to your body anymore. It just grinds like wearing a collar made of frozen bark. By day 2, you've got open sores where the collar meets your throat. By day 4, those sores are weeping and possibly infected, but there's nothing to do except wrap them with cloth that immediately freezes to the wound. Historians still argue whether medieval archers wore full harness or minimal protection to maximize mobility. Evidence is scattered. Some period illustrations show archers in full gear, others show them in basically shirts and hope. The truth probably varied by wealth, by how much the commander cared about keeping archers alive, and by whether anyone had bothered to maintain the equipment stores. Your leather was pulled from a pile that smelled like mold and regret. You got what fit approximately, and what fit approximately doesn't fit well. The gambeson underneath should provide insulation, cotton or wool batting between layers of linen stitched in channels to keep the stuffing distributed. It's medieval insulation technology, and on paper, it works. In practice, your gambeson soaked through with sweat on the first day's march, then froze overnight, and now you're wearing a quilted ice vest that conducts cold directly into your core. The moisture never fully evaporates because air temperatures stay below freezing, and your body can't generate enough heat to dry thick fabric. So the gambeson stays damp, stays cold, stays pressed against your skin in a clammy embrace that makes you shiver even when you're moving. The straps are worse than the armour itself. Leather straps buckle the jerkin closed, hold the various pieces in alignment, keep the whole assemblage from sliding around your torso. But leather straps shrink when they freeze, they tighten. What was snug yesterday morning is constricting today. You're being slowly squeezed by your own equipment. Ribs compressed breathing shallower, because your armour has decided to hug you tighter than your mother ever did. You can't loosen the straps mid-march because your fingers don't work well enough for fine buckle manipulation. So you suffer. You breathe in short gasps. You feel your ribs grinding against hardened leather with every step. And let's talk about the gaps. Leather armour isn't plate, it doesn't cover everything. Your armpits are exposed because you need shoulder mobility. Your groin is protected by maybe a leather skirt or hanging tassets, but those gap when you sit or kneel, which means your most vulnerable equipment is frequently exposed to both cold and arrows. Your neck, as mentioned, is just meat wrapped in frozen collar. An arrow through any gap is as lethal as an arrow through unarmoured flesh, which means your protection is really just psychological. It makes you feel safer while providing minimal actual defence. The weight is deceptive. Leather isn't heavy, but frozen leather plus frozen gambeson, plus the accumulated ice from your own breath, condensing on the surface adds up to maybe 20 extra pounds, distributed across your torso. That's 20 pounds your legs have to carry through snow. 20 pounds your already strained back has to support. 20 pounds that throws off your balance when you're trying to shoot, making you compensate by leaning, which strains different muscles, which creates new pain in different locations. Some archers try to warm their armour by the fire at night. This is a mistake you make exactly once. Frozen leather near flame doesn't thaw gracefully at steams, it warps, it can crack if the temperature changes too rapid. You watched an archer hold his jerkin too close to the flames trying to drive out the cold, and the leather literally split along the shoulder seam with a sound like ripping fabric. Now his armour is compromised and he's got no replacement. He stuffed the gap with spare cloth, but cloth doesn't stop blades. He'll probably die because he wanted to be warm for 5 minutes. Your gloves' leather mitts with fingers exposed for shooting are their own category of failure. The leather is thin enough to allow dexterity but thick enough to provide no insulation whatsoever. Your fingers are still exposed for drawing, which defeats half the purpose of gloves, and the covered portions of your hand are just encased in frozen leather that prevents blood flow without preventing cold. You've taken to stuffing the gloves with dry grass when you're not shooting, trying to trap any body heat, but grass compresses to nothing, and then you're just wearing slightly lumpy frozen gloves that make you look like you have a plant disease. The armour also marks you. Enemy scouts can identify archers by their gear lighter than infantry, more uniform than peasant levies, that distinctive leather jerkin profile. You're a target. Not the primary target, maybe, because knights on horseback present more obvious threats, but a target nonetheless. And your armour won't stop much. A crossbow bolt at close range punches through boiled leather like it's silk. A sword thrust finds the gaps. Even a lucky dagger in the confusion of close combat slides between your inadequate plates and into something vital. By the end of the first week, your leather armour has moulded itself to your body in all the wrong ways. It's permanently frozen in the shape of your hunched marching posture. When you try to stand straight, rare but sometimes necessary, the armour resists, holds you in that forward lean like it's trying to remind you what you've become. The gambeson underneath has developed hard spots where moisture accumulated and froze, repeatedly creating lumps of ice-stiffened fabric that press into your flesh like small rocks sewn into the lining. You dream about taking it off, just stripping it all away and standing in your shirt, feeling air against your skin, feeling your ribs expand fully. But you can't. The armour is your excuse for being here. Unarmoured men are camp followers, servants walking rations for the crows. Armoured men are soldiers protected by military law from summary execution, if captured, entitled to their share of plunder and pay. The armour is proof you matter even if it's slowly crushing and freezing you to death. So you keep it on, you endure, and every morning when you struggle to buckle the frozen straps with frozen fingers, you wonder if maybe the previous owner had the right idea when he died in this thing and saved everyone the trouble of cleaning it. You are personally responsible for 24 arrows, and each one cost more than a week of your peacetime wages. Think about that. Each stick, because that's what an arrow is. Fundamentally a very expensive stick with feathers, and a metal point represents 7 days of labour. You'll never see compensated if you lose it. Break it or shoot it into a snowbank you can't relocate. The economics of medieval archery are deliberately designed to make you paranoid, careful and acutely aware that your ammunition is worth more than you are. The arrows live in a leather quiver slung across your back, positioned so you can reach over your shoulder and draw them quickly during combat. In theory. In practice, with frozen leather armour restricting your shoulder movement and your gambeson adding bulk, reaching back for an arrow feels like trying to scratch an itch in the middle of your spine while wearing a barrel. You fumble, you grab the wrong shaft, you pull too hard and 2 arrows come out tangled together. Meanwhile, enemies are advancing and your sergeant is screaming to loose, and you're performing contortions trying to extract a single arrow from your own back. Each arrow is about 30 inches long, scaled to your draw length, which is roughly your arm span and weighs maybe 2 ounces. Doesn't sound like much until you're carrying 24 of them, plus the bow, plus the armour, plus your personal kit through miles of frozen forest. The quiver alone, fully loaded, adds 3 pounds positioned high on your back, which throws off your centre of gravity and makes you top-heavy. You compensate by leaning forward more, which strains your lower back, which compounds the existing pain from carrying the bow. You're becoming a mobile catalogue of skeletal misalignment. The shafts are ash or birch, straight-grained and carefully selected. A crooked arrow flies crooked, and a crooked arrow is a wasted arrow, which means wasted money, which means you've just thrown away a week's wages. The fletching goose feathers, usually 3 per arrow, controls the arrow's spin and stability in flight. But feathers and moisture are mortal enemies. Wet feathers clump, lose their shape, stop directing airflow. Your arrows have been exposed to snow, to condensation, to the general dampness that permeates everything in winter forests. You try to keep them dry by covering the quiver with oiled cloth, but oilcloth freezes too, becomes stiff and useless, and anyway, moisture finds a way. Historians still argue whether medieval archers fletched their own arrows or received pre-made ammunition from centralised suppliers. Evidence suggests both wealthier archers and professional companies had access to quality arrows made by skilled fletchers, while conscripts like you got whatever was available and were expected to repair or replace as needed. You know basic fletching. You've glued feathers back on using animal-derived adhesive that works great in warm weather and becomes brittle garbage in the cold. 3 of your arrows already have compromised fletching. You'll shoot them if you must, but you know they'll wobble, lose accuracy, probably tumble after 50 yards. The arrowheads are the real expense. Iron bodkin points designed to punch through mail or padding forged by smiths who charge accordingly. Some arrows have broader hunting heads better for unarmoured targets, but less effective against protected enemies. You've got to mix 18 bodkins, 6 broadheads, because that's what was issued, and you don't get to choose your loadout based on anticipated targets. You get what the quartermaster hands you and you sign a document indicating you'll return all 24, or provide compensation for losses. Compensation. That's the trap. You can't afford to replace arrows. The advance pay you received, maybe a few shillings, is already spent on food and necessities for your family back home. If you lose arrows in combat, you're supposed to recover them after the battle. This means walking across fields full of bodies, digging through snow, pulling arrows from corpses or trees or the frozen ground. Some arrows are recoverable, some are snapped. Some are buried under enemies you don't have time to move, and some are claimed by other archers who found them first and aren't about to give them back to you out of solidarity. The weight of financial responsibility sits heavier than the physical weight. Every time you shoot, you're making an economic calculation. Is this target worth an arrow? Can I retrieve it afterward? What if I miss a missed arrow in snow is effectively invisible? White shaft against white ground, buried under powder gone. You've seen archers refuse to shoot during skirmishes because they couldn't guarantee recovery. Better to be court-martialed for cowardice than bankrupted for lost ammunition. The choice between honour and solvency is easier than songs suggest. Your arrows also mark you as valuable to enemies. Archers who die on the field are immediately stripped of their quivers. A full quiver is portable wealth, 24 arrows that can be sold, reused, or kept for personal use. You're not just carrying weapons, you're carrying currency that makes you worth killing. If you're captured, they'll take your arrows before they take your boots. If you're wounded and can't defend yourself, friendlies might take your arrows before they take you to the surgeon. Ammunition creates a moral hazard where your value dead might exceed your value alive. The arrows rattle when you move. Leather quivers don't silence wood against wood. Every step produces a soft clicking like skeletal fingers tapping. It's a sound that marks you, announces you make stealth impossible. In ambush situations, archers are supposed to carry arrows separately wrapped in cloth to muffle sound, but this means slower access during actual combat. Another compromise, another trade-off between ideal tactics and miserable reality. Some arrows have personal marks, small scratches, or paint near the nock to identify ownership. Yours have a double notch you carved with your knife, 2 parallel lines that mean nothing except, "These are mine, return them after we've finished killing." The marks rarely matter. In the chaos of battle arrow identification is the least of anyone's concerns. But you carved them anyway, some primitive assertion of ownership over these expensive sticks that might be the last valuable thing you ever possess. At night you count them. Pull each one from the quiver, inspect the shaft for cracks, check the fletching, feel the point for sharpness. 24 leaving camp. 24 now. The count is ritual, prayer accounting ledger. As long as the number stays constant, you're solvent. The moment it drops, you're in debt to the crown, to the quartermaster, to the system that values arrows more than archers. You slide them back carefully, whisper a count, and hope tomorrow doesn't require you to calculate the cost of survival in lost shafts. The camp is a clearing in the forest where 200 men pretend that huddling together creates warmth. It doesn't. What it creates is a concentrated area of misery, a social geometry where everyone's trying to get closer to the 3 inadequate fires while maintaining enough personal space to avoid sharing lice. You arrive after a 14-hour march, legs shaking, and realise there are no tents, no shelters, no structures whatsoever except what you build yourself from materials that don't exist. The veterans know what to do. They immediately start scraping away snow down to frozen earth, creating shallow depressions that will serve as windbreaks. Some pair up and construct lean-tos using branches and whatever fabric they can scavenge cloaks, spare tunics. Sometimes just pine boughs layered thick enough to block some wind. You watch and learn. Nobody teaches you. Teaching takes energy that everyone's hoarding for staying alive. You imitate. You find a spot near 3 other archers who don't actively tell you to leave and you start digging. Digging frozen ground with your hands because you don't have a shovel. The earth is hard as stone for the first few inches, then slightly less hard. Then eventually you reach dirt that's merely frozen instead of petrified. Your fingers already damaged from drawing the bow now take on secondary damage from clawing at half-frozen soil. You scrape out a depression maybe 8 inches deep and roughly body length. This is your bed. This is also your grave if tonight goes badly. The wind is the architect of suffering. It doesn't blow steadily that would be almost manageable. Instead, it gusts, pauses, swirls, changes direction with malicious creativity. Your lean-to position to block wind from the north becomes useless when the wind shifts west. You rebuild. The wind shifts south. You give up rebuilding and just lie in your depression, accepting that wind will find you from all directions eventually, and the lean-to is more psychological comfort than actual protection. Snow starts falling around dusk. Not the gentle Christmas snow of paintings and memory, but small hard pellets of ice snow that sting exposed skin and accumulate with aggressive speed. Within an hour everything is white again. Your lean-to groans under accumulating weight. Some shelters collapse, dumping snow on sleeping men who wake, screaming disoriented, convinced they're buried alive. They're not wrong, they're just not dead yet. The fires are pathetic. Wet wood doesn't burn well, and all the wood here is wet, frozen, or both. The flames produce more smoke than heat, and the smoke hangs low in the cold air, choking everyone within 20 feet. You're forced to choose freeze at a distance or suffocate up close. Most men rotate warming their fronts while their backs freeze, then turning to warm their backs while their fronts freeze. You never achieve equilibrium. You just alternate which half of your body is in crisis. Historians still argue whether medieval armies used large communal fires or small individual ones. Evidence suggests it varied by situation resources and how much the commander cared about keeping his force combat-ready versus merely alive. Your fires are small because fuel is scarce, and fuel is scarce because nobody assigned wood-gathering duty until after everyone was already exhausted. Some men ventured into the dark forest to collect deadfall, some didn't return. Whether they deserted, got lost, or met wolves, nobody knows. Their absence is noted but not investigated. Food arrives as you're losing feeling in your feet. A cart pulled by an ox that looks more dead than alive, driven by a camp follower who distributes wooden bowls of something that might generously be called stew. It's mostly water that once touched grain with occasional chunks of something that might be turnip or might be horse. The bowl is hot, which is its primary virtue. You wrap your hands around it, absorbing heat through the wood, and the warmth travels up your arms like a rumour of better days. The stew itself is nearly flavourless. Salt, maybe. Some herb that died months ago. Grease floating on top in congealed circles. You eat it anyway, drinking more than chewing, because there's nothing solid enough to require teeth. The warmth inside your stomach is momentary but real. For 30 seconds you feel almost human. Then the bowl is empty. The warmth fades and you're cold again from the inside out now. because your body is trying to digest food. With blood flow, it doesn't have. Sleep is a negotiation with discomfort. You lie in your snow depression wrapped in your cloak, which is wool, and therefore theoretically insulating but also damp, and therefore practically useless. You've lined the bottom of your depression with pine boughs, creating a barrier between your body and the frozen ground. This helps marginally. You can feel the cold seeping up through the boughs, through your cloak, through your frozen gambeson into your bones. The ground is extracting heat from your body with the efficiency of a tax collector. The sleep rotation system means you're awake every 2 hours for guard duty. Not everyone, just a rotating third of the camp, which means you're woken from whatever shallow sleep you've achieved, handed a spear, or told to stay alert, and expected to stand watch in darkness, so complete you couldn't see an enemy until he was close enough to smell. You stand. You shift your weight. You slap your arms against your sides to keep blood moving. You stare into black forest and imagine threats that may or may not exist. During your watch you hear things, branches cracking under snow weight, animal sounds that might be deer or might be wolves or might be enemy scouts imitating animal sounds. The wind playing tricks, creating voices in the dark whispers that sound like conversations happening just beyond the firelight. You tell yourself it's nothing. You grip your spear tighter. You count the minutes until your watch ends and you can return to your depression and your inadequate cloak and the freezing ground that at least isn't asking you to stay vigilant. The worst part isn't the cold or the hunger or the fear. It's the knowledge that this is every night. Not a temporary hardship before returning to comfort, but the new baseline of existence. You will sleep like this or fail to sleep like this for weeks, months possibly, until the campaign ends or you end whichever comes first. The camp isn't a refuge from the war. The camp is the war, a slow grinding siege against your own body's ability to maintain temperature and sanity. Some men sleep curled against each other, sharing body heat in intimate clusters that would be scandalous in any other context. Here it's survival. Pride and propriety freeze to death around day 3. You haven't reached that point yet. You're still trying to preserve some dignity, some sense of self-sufficiency. But you've noticed the clusters. You've noticed they seem less miserable than you. The math is inevitable. Your dignity will last maybe 3 more nights. Then you'll be pressed against strangers, breathing their breath, feeling their hearts beat through their ribs, just another desperate animal in a pile trying to remember what warmth feels like. Your body is a furnace burning fuel it doesn't have, and the math is brutal. A man marching through snow with full gear burns somewhere around 6,000 calories a day. That's not an estimate, that's your body screaming for energy to maintain core temperature, move through resistance, carry weight, and occasionally not die. Medieval armies understood this conceptually even without calorie counting. They knew men needed food. What they didn't know or didn't care about was how to actually provide 6,000 calories to hundreds of soldiers in winter forests, where supply lines are theoretical concepts and reality is mouldy grain. You get about 1,500 calories a day if you're lucky. Your ration is a fist-sized piece of bread so hard it could be used as a weapon, some cheese that's more green than white, and occasionally a strip of salted pork that's been salted to the point of being pure sodium with meat memories. The bread is dark, rye dense and sour baked weeks ago, and stored in conditions that encourage neither freshness nor edibility. You gnaw it like a beaver working saliva into the crust until it softens enough to chew. Your teeth hurt from the effort. Some men break teeth on the bread. Those men starve faster because now they can't process even the inadequate rations they receive. The cheese is survival food in crystal form. It's so aged, so desiccated that it barely qualifies as dairy anymore, more like flavoured wax. You eat it in small pieces, letting it dissolve slowly on your tongue, because chewing uses energy, and energy is the resource you're bleeding to death from. The fat content helps cheese is calorie dense, which makes it valuable beyond its taste, which is good because its taste is foot-wrapped in disappointment. The pork appears every 3 or 4 days, and when it does, it's an event. Salted meat represents protein fat, something that once lived and might help you continue living. The salt content is so extreme that eating it makes you desperately thirsty, and drinking water in winter means melting snow, which means standing near a fire you don't have access to, which means political negotiation with whoever controls fire access. Some men eat the pork and don't drink, letting the salt pull moisture from their tissues, concentrating their blood, until their kidneys start making decisions about which organs deserve filtration. Those men piss dark brown by morning and wonder why they feel worse after eating. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers were chronically malnourished, or whether contemporary accounts exaggerated suffering for dramatic effect. The truth is visible in your body. You've lost weight you didn't have to lose. Your belt needs new holes. Your face has developed that hollowed-out look where cheekbones become aggressive and eyes sink into defensive positions. You're not starving in the acute sense, nobody's dying of immediate hunger. But you're starving in the slow sense, your body consuming itself, metabolizing muscle, because there's no other fuel available. The ale helps, barely. It's weak stuff, brewed from whatever grain was cheapest, and it's half frozen in the barrels, which means it slushes when poured, and tastes like cold regret. But its calories may be 200 per serving, and it's safer than water, which might be contaminated, and it provides the psychological comfort of being something other than snowmelt. You drink your ration in the evening, feeling it cold all the way down, and your empty stomach cramps around the liquid, like it's trying to digest the concept of nourishment. The hunger is constant but evolving. First week it's sharp, your stomach actively complaining, growling, producing the physical sensation of emptiness. Second week it dulls. Your stomach stops complaining because it's accepted the new reality. The hunger moves deeper, becomes systemic. You feel it in your muscles, which are weak, in your thoughts, which are slow, in your mood, which is murderous. Everything irritates you. The sound of men chewing, the sight of anyone who looks less hungry than you, the knowledge that somewhere nobles are eating venison and white bread while you're gnawing fossilized rye. Food becomes obsession. You think about it constantly. Not abstract food, specific memories. Your wife's pottage with actual vegetables. The bread from the baker in your village, still warm. The chicken you had last Christmas, so tender it fell from the bone. These memories are vivid, painful, more present than your current surroundings. You have conversations about food with other archers, long detailed discussions about meals you've eaten, meals you'd like to eat, meals you'd kill for. These conversations are torture and comfort simultaneously. Some men supplement rations by foraging though winter forests offer little. Bark from certain trees can be chewed for fibre if not nutrition. Pine needles can be boiled into tea that provides some vitamin content and taste like drinking a forest floor. Desperate men dig through snow looking for frozen berries, roots, anything organic that might contain calories. You tried this once, found some shriveled rose hips, ate them, and got diarrhea that cost you more energy than the hips provided. That's when you learned the cruel calculus of supplemental foraging. It usually costs more than it yields. The weight loss affects everything. Your armour, which was too tight, now fits. This seems like progress until you realise it means you've lost mass around your chest and shoulders, the exact muscles you need for drawing a bow. Your draw weight is declining along with your body weight. The bow that was manageable in October is borderline impossible in December because you're weaker, colder, and running on fumes. You compensate by using worse form, which creates new injuries, which requires more energy to heal, which you don't have. It's a spiral and you're circling the drain. Some men get packages from home. Their families somehow arrange to send food, dried apples, nuts, proper bread once, even a small wheel of good cheese. These men become temporary celebrities surrounded by hungry friends offering trade services money they don't have. Most share a little keeping most. You don't blame them. You'd do the same. You dream about receiving a package though you know your family can't afford to send one. They're probably hungrier than you are. Your absence means one less mouth to feed, but also one less worker bringing in resources. They're doing math as brutal as yours, just in a different location. The irony is you're surrounded by potential food. The forest contains deer, rabbits, birds, all theoretically edible. But hunting requires energy, time, and permission. You can't just wander off to hunt. That's desertion. Organised hunting parties go out occasionally led by nobles who treat it as sport, and they bring back game that's distributed according to rank. You get a taste. A mouthful. Enough to remember what meat tastes like and to resent everyone who got more. The march is what kills most men, not combat. Not arrows or swords or glorious charges, just the slow, mechanical destruction of feet and joints, and will through repetitive movement across terrain designed by Satan himself. 15 miles doesn't sound impossible. People walk 15 miles in a day all the time, but those people aren't walking through knee-deep snow in frozen boots while carrying 60 pounds of gear and operating on a calorie deficit that would make a prisoner of war look well fed. Those people also get to stop when they're tired. You don't. The snow is never uniform. Sometimes it's powder that seems light until you're post-holing each step, breaking through the surface. Your foot sink into mid-shin or deeper, requiring you to physically lift your entire leg out before taking the next step. Post-holing through snow is like climbing stairs that never end, each step demanding a full leg lift against resistance. Your thighs burn. Your hip flexors scream. After an hour, your legs are shaking. After 3 hours, you're moving on spite and terror of being left behind. Other times, the snow has a crust, a frozen top layer that almost supports your weight, but not quite. These are the worst conditions. You step, the crust holds for a heartbeat, then breaks, and your foot punches through in a way that twists your ankle unexpectedly. You can't establish rhythm, can't predict which steps will hold and which will collapse. Every step is a small betrayal, and by midday your ankles are swollen, your calves are knotted, and you're walking like someone recently beaten with sticks. The cold turns the physics of walking into active warfare against your own body. Your feet are wrapped in wool socks, if you're lucky, inside leather boots that were made for someone else's feet and don't quite fit yours. The leather is frozen stiff. Your boots don't bend at the toe, which means your gait becomes a shuffle stomp, less efficient, more exhausting. Each step requires lifting your entire foot and placing it down flat, because your boot has forgotten it's supposed to flex. Your shins develop splints, painful inflammation where muscle attaches to bone, and there's nothing to do except keep walking. Historians still argue whether medieval armies maintained formation during long marches or devolved into loose columns of miserable individuals. Your experience suggests the latter. Formation requires energy and coordination that nobody has. The column stretches and contracts like a dying snake, men clustering where terrain allows spreading where it narrows. The fastest walkers bunch at the front. The weakest fall back. You're somewhere in the middle, trying not to become part of the rear where stragglers get picked off by cold exhaustion, or wolves that follow the column like patient creditors. Your feet develop blisters on day 1. By day 3, those blisters have burst, reformed burst, again. You're walking on raw tissue that rubs against frozen leather with every step. Some men stuff their boots with moss or grass for padding. This helps until the organic material gets wet and freezes, creating lumps of ice inside your boot that might actually be worse than blisters. You tried the moss technique. You're back to just blisters and prayer. The frostbite starts at the toes. You don't notice immediately because everything's numb, but after several days of frozen boots and inadequate circulation, your smallest toes start changing colour. They go white, first, bloodless waxy, then grey. You've seen men whose toes have turned black, dead tissue still attached to living feet. Those men walk slower. Their gait becomes even more damaged because they're unconsciously trying not to put weight on dead toes. Eventually, if they survive long enough, the toes will fall off. Gangrene might spread first, or it might just be clean necrosis where the toe separates cleanly. Either way, it's amateur amputation courtesy of winter. Your knees are developing that grinding sensation that suggests cartilage damage. Every step down a slope, and there are many slopes, because forests are not flat, sends a jolt of pain through your knee joint that makes you gasp. Your body is supposed to have fluid cushioning bone against bone. The fluid is still there probably, but it's cold and maybe more viscous, and your joints sound like bags of gravel being shaken. Other men have the same sounds. The column walks with a symphony of clicking, popping, grinding joints like a percussion section made of suffering. The pace is determined by whoever's leading, usually a mounted officer who's not walking, and therefore has no concept of what he's demanding. He sets a speed that seems reasonable from horseback, maybe 3 miles per hour. On flat ground, in good weather with proper food and rest, this would be fine. Here it's a forced march. You're doing 3 miles per hour through snow on damaged feet with damaged joints carrying weight, while your body cannibalizes itself. Men collapse. They just stop walking, sit in the snow and refuse to rise. Some are encouraged back to their feet with threats or violence. Others are left. The column can't stop for individuals. Water is a constant problem. You're sweating despite the cold exertion produces heat. Heat produces sweat. Sweat soaks your clothing. But you're also dehydrated because breathing cold, dry air pulls moisture from your lungs and mouth. Your lips crack and bleed. Your throat feels like raw meat. You need water, but water sources are frozen. You eat snow, which costs your body heat to melt, which means you're using calories to obtain liquid that doesn't contain calories. More negative math. Some men collect snow in pouches kept against their bodies using body heat to melt it slowly. This works, but makes you colder and wetter. The mental aspect might be worse than the physical. You can see the column stretching ahead, men walking, and you know every one of them is as miserable as you. There's no destination visible, no end point to focus on. Just trees and snow and more walking. The monotony is its own torture. Your mind goes strange places. You count steps 1, 2, 3, lose count, start over. You compose letters to your wife that you'll never write. You imagine elaborate meals in detail that borders on hallucination. You argue with yourself about whether you'll survive, presenting evidence for both sides like a lawyer. Some men sing. Work songs, marching songs, anything to maintain rhythm and distract from pain. The singing is weak, breathless, but it helps. You join occasionally mouthing words because you don't have breath for actual singing. The sound is pathetic, a few dozen half-frozen men wheezing out folk songs, but it creates something almost like camaraderie. You're suffering together, which doesn't reduce the suffering, but makes it feel less lonely. By afternoon, the column has developed casualties who aren't dead, just broken. Men limping with improvised crutches made from branches. Men being supported by companions, one arm draped over a neighbour's shoulder. Men walking barefoot because their boots fell apart and barefoot is somehow better than frozen leather shreds. You're still walking independently, which makes you one of the successful ones. Your standards for success have adjusted dramatically. You've stopped moving, and that's when the real cold arrives. During the march, your body generated heat through sheer, miserable effort muscles, working blood-pumping metabolism, screaming. Now you're standing in formation at the forest edge, bow in hand, waiting for orders that haven't come, and your body temperature is plummeting like a stone down a well. The sweat that soaked your gambeson during the walk is now freezing against your skin. You're wearing your own ice shirt. Every small movement produces a crackling sound as frozen fabric breaks and refreezes in new configurations. This is ambush position, allegedly. The enemy is somewhere in these trees scouts reported movement an hour ago, or maybe yesterday time has become unreliable. Your company of archers has been placed here in a slight depression that provides minimal cover with instructions to remain silent and still until the enemy enters killing range. Remain still, in sub-zero temperatures, while wearing wet clothing, while your body desperately tries to maintain core temperature and realizes it's fighting a losing battle. The forest geometry works against you. Trees provide concealment, but also channels for wind. The air doesn't blow through the forest, it accelerates between the trunks like water through a pipe, hitting you with gusts that feel targeted personal. Your face is exposed because you need vision to shoot. Your cheeks go numb first, then your nose, then your forehead. You've seen men with frostbitten faces, the skin turns white and hard like candle wax. Later it blisters, turns black, sloughs off. If you survive this ambush, you might do so with a face that frightens children. Your fingers are the critical failure point. You've tucked your right hand, your drawing hand, inside your gambeson against your body, trying to preserve finger function for when shooting becomes necessary. Your left hand grips the bow and has no protection. The wood conducts cold directly into your palm. You can feel your hand temperature dropping, the fingers stiffening. You flex them experimentally. They move but slowly, like they're operating through molasses. In 5 minutes you won't be able to draw the bow. In 10 you won't be able to grip it. Historians still argue whether medieval archers actually maintained these kinds of static ambush positions, or whether most engagements were more mobile. The chronicles describe set-piece battles, with archers in formation, but chronicles are written by people who weren't freezing in forests. Your reality is this: you're a weapon system waiting to deploy, and the cold is degrading your operational capacity with every breath. The psychological torture is exquisite. You can't move to generate heat that breaks concealment. You can't talk to the man beside you that breaks silence. You can't stomp your feet, swing your arms, do any of the small movements that might keep circulation going. You're a statue slowly freezing solid, and the only variable you control is how you think about it. Some men mentally recite prayers. Some count. Some try to remember warmth so vividly they can almost feel it. You're thinking about your hearth at home, the way the fire sounds, when green wood pops, the way your wife's face looks in firelight. It doesn't make you warmer, it makes you sadder. The waiting is measured in physical degradation. First your extremities go numb, fingers, toes, nose, ears. This is your body prioritizing shutting down the periphery to protect the core. Then the shivering starts, small tremors that you try to suppress, because shivering makes noise and betrays position. But shivering is involuntary, your muscles generating heat through rapid contraction. Fighting it takes effort, which uses energy, which produces heat which your body desperately needs. You're trapped in a feedback loop where the solution to cold is the thing you're forbidden to do. Your bow is changing in your hand. The wood has contracted in the cold, the string has tightened or loosened. You're not sure which, and the draw weight feels different. Heavier maybe. Or maybe you're just weaker. You won't know until you try to draw, and you won't try until enemies appear, and you're starting to wonder if enemies are even coming, or if this is just an exercise in seeing how long archers can remain combat effective in frozen stillness. The answer appears to be not very long. Other archers are visible in your peripheral vision, spread in a loose line among the trees. They're all doing the same statue impression, all gradually freezing. One man is swaying, slightly hypothermia affecting balance. Another has pulled his hood forward so far you can't see his face, which means he can't see much either, which means he's prioritizing warmth over effectiveness. Smart or stupid, you can't decide, maybe both. The enemy finally appears, and you almost don't care because it means you get to move. They're infantry, maybe 30 men trudging through the same snow you trudged through earlier, looking as miserable as you feel. They're not marching in tight formation. They're scattered, poorly organized, clearly not expecting contact. Easy targets in theory. In practice, you need to draw a bow with hands that have forgotten their hands. The order comes a hissed command passed down the line. Nock. You reach back for an arrow with your good hand, the one you've kept warm against your body. The arrow comes free easily enough. Knocking it to the string requires both hands, requires the frozen left hand to stabilize the bow, while the right hand positions the arrow. Your left hand is stupid with cold. You fumble the arrow, drop it in the snow curse, silently pull another. This one knocks. You don't know if it's seated properly because you can't feel it, but it's there probably good enough. Draw. This is where physics meets biology meets desperation. You hook 3 fingers around the string, or try to. Your fingers don't want to curl. They're stiff, reluctant, like someone else's. Fingers temporarily attached to your hand. You force them into position through sheer will, then begin the pull. The bow resists. Of course it resists. It's a war bow, it always resists. But now it feels impossibly heavy, like you're trying to bend iron. Your shoulder shakes. Your arm trembles. The string moves backward in small jerks, not the smooth draw you've practiced 10,000 times, but a stuttering, pathetic pull that gets you maybe 3/4 of the way to full draw before your fingers start slipping. You anchor, sort of. Your hand is supposed to touch your cheek, but your hand is numb, and your cheek is numb, so you're anchoring by memory and hope. You aim also sort of down the arrow shaft at a man-shaped blur in the trees. Release. Your fingers don't release smoothly. They kind of unlock and let the string go, which means the string doesn't leave cleanly, which means the arrow flight will be compromised. You watch it wobble through the air, watch it drift right of your intended target, watch it disappear into the forest somewhere. The command to loose volleys is less about precision and more about creating a cloud of death that hopefully intersects with enemy positions. You're not aiming at individuals anymore, you're aiming at a general area where humans might be, and you're doing it in coordination with 50 other archers who are equally cold, equally impaired, equally desperate to convert stored arrows into violence before their fingers completely fail. The sergeant calls the rhythm knock draw loose. Knock draw loose. It's supposed to create waves of arrows saturating the killing zone, overwhelming the enemy's ability to shelter or advance. In practice, it's chaos with a beat. You knock the second arrow, draw it with fingers that are beyond pain into some new territory, where sensation has been replaced by mechanical function. Your body is performing actions it remembers, even though the performing parts can barely feel themselves. Draw. The string comes back. Your shoulder screams, your fingers hook around hemp that might as well be steel cable. Loose. The arrow launches into grey air, joining dozens of others in trajectories you can't track, because you're already reaching for the next shaft. The psychological dissonance is profound. You're shooting at people who are dying, probably, but you can't see individual deaths, can't confirm kills, can't know if your specific arrows are finding flesh or just adding to the general threat environment. Medieval archery at range isn't personal, it's statistical. You're creating probability fields where standing becomes lethal, where movement becomes suicide, where the enemy's only rational choice is retreat or die. Some choose retreat. Some don't have time to choose anything. The enemy's shooting back. You know this because arrows are arriving, though from where and from whom isn't clear. They make sounds, whispers as they pass, close thuds when they hit trees, occasionally screams when they hit people. An archer 2 positions left takes an arrow through the shoulder and drops with a sound that's more surprise than pain. He's trying to pull it out, which is the worst thing he could do, but nobody stops him because everyone's focused on their own shooting, their own survival, their own rhythm of knock draw loose. Historians still argue whether medieval arrow volleys were actually effective or mostly psychological warfare. The math suggests effectiveness. A skilled archer could shoot 12 arrows per minute, so 50 archers produce 600 arrows per minute, creating a genuinely lethal environment. But skill assumes warm fingers, proper draw weights, and arrows that fly true, You're operating at maybe 60% capacity, which means the volley's less devastating rain of death and more concerning amount of projectiles. Still dangerous, still lethal, just less so than the songs claim. Your quiver is emptying faster than you'd like. You've shot maybe 10 arrows in 2 minutes, half your load gone in what feels like seconds. Each arrow represents money you don't have, but that calculation is distant now, abstract. Survival trumps economics. You shoot because stopping means dying, and dying means your debt doesn't matter because you're not around to pay it. The quartermaster's ledger seems very unimportant when arrows are hitting the tree you're hiding behind. The bow is heating up from repeated use. Your hands pulling the string, the friction of arrow nocks sliding along the wood, it's generating warmth through mechanical action. The bow is actually warm to the touch now, which is surreal, given that everything else is frozen. You're holding the warmest object in this forest, and it's a weapon that's actively trying to tear your shoulder apart. There's probably a metaphor there, but you're too busy not dying to appreciate it. Visibility is degrading. The air is full of snow that might be falling naturally or might have been knocked loose from branches by arrows and movement. The enemy is harder to see now, just shapes moving between trees, and you're shooting at shadows and assumptions. Maybe you're hitting them. Maybe they're all dead already. Maybe they're flanking while you shoot at nothing. The ambiguity is terrifying. You loose another arrow into the general area where threats might be, and hope mathematics works in your favour. Your fingers are betraying you systematically. The index finger on your drawing hand has gone completely numb. You can see it moving, see it hooking the string, but you can't feel it. The middle and ring fingers still have some sensation, but it's fading. You're shooting on borrowed time, each arrow potentially the last one you can physically draw. The sergeant is still calling rhythm, but fewer archers are matching it. The volley is breaking down into individual shooting, as each man works at whatever pace his damaged body allows. An arrow hits your bow, not you the bow. It strikes the upper limb with a crack that sounds like the world ending, and for a moment you're certain the bow has shattered, certain you're now holding expensive firewood. But the bow is intact mostly. The arrow glanced off, leaving a groove in the wood, but no structural damage you can detect. Your bow has armor scars now. It survived an attack meant for you. You feel an absurd gratitude toward an inanimate object that has no capacity for protection, but protected you anyway through geometry and luck. The enemy is retreating. You can see them moving back through the trees, dragging wounded, leaving bodies. Victory, allegedly. You've held the position, repelled the attack, achieved the tactical objective. The sergeant confirms this by ordering everyone to cease shooting and hold position. Hold position. You're standing in snow that's mixed with blood now, some of it from wounded archers, some possibly from enemies who got close enough to bleed locally. Your legs are shaking. Your hands won't unclench from shooting position. The arrow recovery begins immediately. Orders come down, collect every arrow you can find, mark them if they're yours, bring them to the collection point. This means walking through the ambush site, stepping over or around bodies, pulling arrows from trees and frozen ground, and occasionally from corpses that haven't stopped bleeding yet. You find 3 of yours identifiable by the double notch near the nock. One is broken, one is intact, one is covered in something you don't examine closely. You wipe it on snow and add it to your quiver. Other arrows are everywhere, sticking from trees at strange angles, buried in snow, lying in scattered groups where quivers were dropped. You collect 6 additional arrows that don't belong to you but are serviceable. Finders, keepers. The economic calculus of war, your net arrow position is now +9, which helps offset the ones you can't find or that broke on impact. You're still in debt overall, but less in debt than an hour ago. Progress is relative. The bowstring is the most fragile component of your weapon system, and Morning Frost treats it like a personal enemy. You wake if what you did last night qualifies as sleep to find a thin layer of ice, coating everything exposed to air, including the string wrapped carefully in your quiver, supposedly protected. Supposedly. The hemp fibers have absorbed atmospheric moisture during the night, and that moisture has frozen, turning the string from flexible cord into something approaching wire. It's stiff, brittle, and absolutely critical to your ability to not die today. The string is roughly as thick as a pencil, twisted from multiple strands of hemp that have been waxed for water resistance. The wax helps, but wax also becomes brittle in extreme cold, losing its flexibility, cracking along the string's length in tiny fissures that weaken the overall structure. You inspect the string by firelight, what little firelight exists, looking for the telltale fuzzing that indicates fiber breakdown, the slight unevenness that suggests weak points, the dark spots where wax has completely failed and moisture has penetrated to the core. The center serving the reinforced section where your fingers grip during the draw is especially vulnerable. This is wrapped with additional thread to protect against finger wear, but the wrapping also traps moisture, creating a pocket where ice can form between layers. You've seen strings snap at the serving during draw, the reinforced section paradoxically becoming the failure point. When a string breaks under full tension, the bow limbs snap forward with all their stored energy. If you're lucky, the string just whips your forearm, leaving a welt that'll bruise for weeks. If you're unlucky, the bow itself can fracture from the sudden release of asymmetric tension, or the string catches your face, your eye, your throat. Historians still argue whether medieval archers carried multiple spare strings or relied on field repairs. Evidence suggests wealthy professional archers had spares. Conscripted farmers like you have whatever you manage to bring, plus whatever you can scavenge. You have one spare string kept in a pouch against your body for warmth. That spare is your insurance policy, your backup plan, your last chance before your bow becomes an expensive walking stick. You check it daily with the kind of attention usually reserved for loved ones. Warming the string is a morning ritual that borders on meditation. You can't just expose it to direct flame that would burn the fibers, melt the wax, destroy the string's integrity instantly. Instead, you hold it near the fire, rotating slowly, trying to drive out moisture and restore flexibility without causing damage. It's a process that requires patience nobody has, and time you can't spare, but the alternative is shooting with a compromised string, which is how archers die stupid deaths. The string stretches and contracts with temperature changes. A string that was properly tensioned yesterday evening is slack this morning because the hemp has contracted in the cold, or it's over tight because you tried to warm it and the fibers expanded. There's no gauge, no measurement system. You judge by feel, by how the string sounds when plucked, by whether the brace height, the distance between string and bow grip looks right to your eye. Get it wrong, and the bow won't shoot properly. Too loose, and the arrow wobbles off the string. Too tight, and the bow loses power, or worse, the excessive tension cracks the limbs. You've developed a superstitious relationship with string maintenance. Some archers talk to their strings, whisper encouragements, treat them like living things that need coaxing. You're not there yet, but you understand the impulse. The string is the only thing standing between you and complete uselessness. It's 2 feet of twisted plant fiber that determines whether you're an archer or just a hungry man carrying wood. Moisture is the relentless enemy. It comes from everywhere. Snow breath, the general dampness of winter forests. Your breath alone, condensing in cold air, can wet the string if you're not careful about how you carry the bow. Some archers wrap strings in oiled leather and wool in whatever fabric they can spare. The wrapping helps, but also traps moisture if it gets through, creating a localized environment where the string can rot slowly, fibers weakening invisibly, until the moment of catastrophic failure. The knocking point where the arrow sits on the string develops where faster than the rest. The arrow knock is a small groove cut into the arrow's end, and it grips the string with enough pressure to stay in place, but not so much that it can't release cleanly. Except in cold, everything grips tighter. The arrow doesn't want to release. You have to pull harder to nock it, push harder to remove it if you need to unload. The repeated friction at the knocking point wears the string fibres creates a weak spot that's invisible until it isn't. Some mornings the string is so stiff it won't flex enough to string the bow. This is a special kind of hell. You've got the bow, you've got the string, but you can't mate them into a functional weapon. The technique for stringing requires bending the bow, hooking one end of the string over the lower nock, stepping through the bow, while pulling the upper limb down and sliding the string's loop over the upper nock. It requires flexibility in the bow, flexibility in the string, and flexibility in your body. In winter, nothing is flexible. You strain, grunt, feel like you're trying to bend iron, and sometimes you succeed and sometimes you don't. Field repairs are desperate acts. If the string breaks and you have no spare, you're trying to splice hemp fibres with numb fingers, trying to re-wax with wax that won't melt, trying to create structural integrity from compromised materials. It rarely works well. A repaired string is weak or uneven, likely to break again soon. But a weak string is better than no string, so you make the repair test it gently pray to whatever saints protect archers, and hope it holds through the next engagement. The sound of a string breaking is distinctive, a sharp crack, like a branch snapping, followed by immediate chaos. The archer curses or screams, the bow limbs shudder. Anyone nearby flinches because they know that sound means someone just lost their primary weapon in a combat zone. You've heard it 3 times this campaign, once during practice, twice during actual fighting. The men whose strings broke are still with the company, carrying their bows, hoping for replacement strings that probably won't come, gradually accepting they're now just infantry with archery training and no way to apply it. The forest is never silent, and that's the problem. If it were silent, you'd hear enemies approaching. Instead, it's full of sounds that might be threats or might be nothing. Branches cracking under snow-weight, ice falling from trees, animals moving through underbrush, wind creating voices in the canopy. You're standing guard at the perimeter here, straining trying to distinguish between the sound of a deer and the sound of a man pretending to be a deer. The difference could be life or death, and you're making the determination with a brain that's sleep-deprived, cold-damaged, and increasingly paranoid. You're simultaneously predator and prey, and both roles require constant vigilance. As predator, you're watching for enemy movements, looking for opportunities to attack, calculating ranges and wind, and whether your frozen fingers could actually draw if targets appeared. As prey, you're aware that enemy archers are doing exactly the same thing, that you're exposed that an arrow could arrive from any direction with no warning except the whisper of fletching, cutting air. The psychological weight of being both hunter and hunted is exhausting, in ways that have nothing to do with physical exertion. The trees provide concealment, but also paranoia. Every trunk could hide an enemy. Every shadow could be a crouched figure waiting for you to turn your back. Your eyes play tricks in the limited light. The grey winter illumination that makes everything look flat removes depth. Perception turns the forest into a stage set where nothing feels real. You see movement spin toward it, find nothing, or find a branch swaying, or find another archer from your own company who's equally jumpy and nearly shoots you before recognition registers. Historians still argue whether medieval warfare involved this kind of constant low-level patrol tension, or whether armies mostly encountered each other in set-piece battles. The chronicles focus on the battles, the dramatic confrontations, the decisive moments. Nobody writes epic poetry about standing in frozen forests for 8 hours, hearing suspicious noises. But this is where you live now, in the undocumented spaces between famous engagements, where the war is mostly waiting and wondering if that sound was hostile. The wolves are real, not imagined. You've seen tracks, paw prints larger than your hand, pressed deep in snow following the column's path. Wolves trail armies because armies produce corpses, and corpses are easy meals for creatures smart enough to wait for humans to do the killing. You're not sure if wolves attack living soldiers, but you're also not sure they don't, and that uncertainty is its own form of torture. Every howl in the distance, and there are many, could be wolves, communicating about you, coordinating, deciding whether you're weak enough to be worth the risk. The sounds of hunting happen at night mostly. Screams that could be rabbits dying, or could be something larger. Snarling that was definitely predatory. Once a sound like bones breaking sharp cracks echoing through the dark, and everyone in camp went silent. Listening hands on weapons. Nothing approached. Whatever was eating, it was eating something that wasn't you. This time. The knowledge that you're sharing the forest with creatures that would happily eat you, if given the opportunity, adds a layer of existential dread to the existing military dread. Your own sounds betray you constantly. You're breathing ragged from cold, and exertion is loud in the stillness. Your armor creaks and cracks. Your stomach growls with a volume that seems impossible for an organ that contains almost nothing. You try to move quietly, but quiet movement in snow is nearly impossible. Each step produces a crunch, a squeak, a sound that travels further than it should because cold air carries sound efficiently. You're a walking alarm system alerting everything in the forest to your presence. The enemy makes sounds too when they're near. You've learned to distinguish between natural forest sounds and human sounds. Humans have rhythm, their footsteps, even when they're trying to be quiet, have a regular pattern that animals don't. Humans disturb snow differently, creating specific sounds of equipment, shifting of cloth moving against cloth of metal fittings, clicking softly. You've become attuned to these differences the way a deer becomes attuned to predator sounds. It's survival evolution happening in real time. The ambush moments are paradoxically quieter than the waiting. When contact is imminent, everyone goes silent. The forest holds its breath. You can hear your own heartbeat impossibly loud, a drum solo in your chest that you're certain everyone can hear. Then the first arrow flies yours or theirs, and the silence shatters into chaos. Shouting, screaming, the whistle thud of arrows hitting various materials, the sounds of men dying which are never dignified, never heroic, just animal noises of pain and fear. You've started hearing things that aren't there. Phantom footsteps behind you, voices calling your name from the trees. Music sometimes faint and far away, except there's no music in frozen forests, and you're hallucinating from stress and cold and exhaustion. You don't mention this to anyone, because mentioning it means admitting your mind is fracturing, and admitting that means being left behind as unreliable. So you keep the hallucinations private, turn toward phantom sounds, find nothing, and pretend it's normal. The birds have mostly fled or gone silent, which removes one source of normal forest sound. In summer, birds provide constant background noise, chirping, singing, calling. In winter, they're either gone south or conserved into silence. Their absence makes every other sound more prominent, more suspicious. When you do hear a bird, it's startling, almost alarming. What bird is stupid enough to stay here? What's it eating? Why is it making noise? The bird sound becomes another thing to investigate, another potential signal that something is wrong. Enemy scouts are the constant threat you never see but always feel. They're out there, your officers confirm this, watching the column reporting movements, choosing ambush points. They're better at forestcraft than you are because this is their territory, their forest, their weather. They know which paths are passable, where streams run under snow, where the wind blows strongest. You're invaders stumbling through someone else's hunting ground, and the locals are patient, and patience kills more soldiers than arrows. The cold has opinions about which parts of your body it wants to destroy. First and fingers are the priority target. You've watched frostbite progress through stages like a disease with a roadmap. It starts with the tips, the parts furthest from your core, most exposed, least defended. The tissue goes white and waxy, loses sensation, stops responding to commands from your brain. This is first-degree frostbite reversible if you catch it early and rewarm properly. You will not catch it early. You will not rewarm properly. This is medieval winter warfare, not a ski lodge with hot cocoa. The field medicine available for frostbite is essentially prayer and amputation, with very little middle ground. The company has a surgeon, using that term loosely, who travels with the baggage train and appears after engagements to assess damage. He's not trained in what we'd call medicine. He's trained in butchery and knowing which limbs can be saved and which need removing before gangrene spreads and kills the whole person. His tools are a saw, several knives of varying sharpness, and a cautery iron that he heats and fires until it glows. His technique is speed. His anaesthetic is alcohol and leather straps to bite. You've seen the triage process. Men line up showing damaged fingers, toes, noses, ears, any extremity that's changed colour and lost function. The surgeon assesses each case with the clinical detachment of someone examining fruit at market. This one's savable, wrap it, keep it warm, hope circulation returns. This one's questionable, we'll watch it, see if it blackens further. This one's gone, the tissue is dead, it'll rot, we take it now or you die later. The decision is made in seconds, executed in minutes. Historians still argue whether medieval army surgeons were effective or simply theatrical performers of terminal care. Survival rates from field surgery were abysmal. Infection killed most patients within days, but the alternative was certain death from sepsis, so maybe butchery with a low success rate was still better than nothing. The surgeon with your company has a reputation for speed, which supposedly improves outcomes. Fast amputation means less blood loss, less shock, less time for the patient to thrash and cause additional damage. It also means less time for the surgeon to doubt his decisions. The finger amputation process is straightforward and horrifying. The patient sits on a stump or log hand extended on a relatively flat surface. The surgeon identifies the joint nearest to the damaged tissue, trying to save as much viable finger as possible while removing all the dead parts. He positions his knife at the joint, checks that someone's holding the patient down, then cuts fast and hard through tendons, cartilage and skin. The finger comes away with a wet sound that you can hear from 10 feet away. Blood wells immediately. The surgeon applies the hot iron to the stump, cauterizing vessels, and the smell of burning flesh joins the smell of everything else burning in the miserable forest. The patient's sounds vary. Some scream, some pass out from shock, which is probably a mercy. Some, the most unsettling, just whimper, quietly, their capacity for expression overwhelmed by pain that exceeds vocabulary. You've watched 3 amputations so far, 2 fingers and 1 toe. The toe patient died anyway 3 days later, probably from infection. The finger patients are still alive, walking around with wrapped stumps, trying to relearn how to hold a bow with fewer gripping points. Your own fingers are approaching decision points. The little finger on your left hand, the bow hand, has been white for 2 days. No sensation. Won't bend when you try to flex it. It's essentially decorative at this point, a dead appendage still attached to your living hand. You haven't shown it to the surgeon because you know what he'll say, and you're not ready to lose pieces of yourself yet. The little finger isn't critical for drawing, you use 3 fingers for that, and the little finger just curls loosely around the grip. Maybe you can keep it. Maybe it'll recover when you finally get somewhere warm. Maybe you're in denial. The prevention strategies are limited and mostly ineffective. Keep your hands warm, except you need your hands functional for shooting, which means exposing them to cold. Move your fingers regularly, except movement requires energy you don't have and time you can't spare. Don't let them get wet, except everything is wet always, and dryness is a theoretical concept. Some archers have taken to the urine warming technique, which you finally accepted as sensible rather than disgusting. Fresh urine is body temperature, sterile and free. You piss into your cupped hands twice a day, now letting the warmth penetrate your palms, wiggling your fingers in the brief heat. It helps. Not enough, but some. The psychological aspect is watching yourself decompose in installments. Each day brings new assessments of which body parts are failing, which are merely damaged, which might recover. You do an inventory every morning. Toes 3 on the right foot are questionable. Fingers left pinky definitely going right. Index finger borderline. Nose probably fine, still has sensation. Ears hard to tell they hurt, which means they're still alive. Penis terrifying to check, but seems functional, thank God for small mercies. You're becoming a map of viable and non-viable tissue, a diagram of survival. Some men lose faces. Frostbite on cheeks, nose, lips. It's devastating, not just medically, but socially. A man with blackened face tissue is marked forever recognizable as someone who suffered and survived or suffered and is still suffering. The face can't be easily hidden like a missing finger. It's your introduction to every future interaction. Hello, I'm the man whose face died on him. Children will stare. Women will turn away. You'll be unemployable in any trade requiring public interaction. The face frostbite victims are the walking warnings, and you're trying desperately not to join their ranks. The cold also causes less visible damage. Nerve damage that won't manifest until later when you discover your hands don't grip properly anymore or your feet don't balance correctly. Circulation damage that leaves you permanently cold sensitive, unable to tolerate normal winter temperatures without pain. Psychological damage from watching your body fail piece by piece. There's no surgery for that, no cautery iron that fixes the mental map of your disintegrating self. Sleep doesn't come in one continuous block like civilized humans enjoy. It comes in 2-hour shifts interrupted by guard duty, cold, discomfort, nightmares, and the biological reality that your body can't maintain deep sleep when it's fighting hypothermia. This isn't modern sleep deprivation, missing a night and feeling groggy. This is medieval sleep destruction, where you haven't had more than 2 consecutive hours of unconsciousness in 10 days and your brain is starting to make creative decisions about what's real. The guard rotation is mathematically brutal. With roughly 200 men in the company, and the need to maintain a perimeter watch at all times, you're pulled for duty every 6 hours or so. 2 hours sleeping, 2 hours guarding. 2 hours sleeping, 2 hours guarding, except the math never works cleanly, because guards get extended when relief doesn't arrive on time, or shortened when officers decide they need bodies elsewhere. You lose track of whether you've slept twice today or 3 times, or if today is still today, or if you've crossed into tomorrow without noticing. The 2-hour guard shift in sub-zero darkness is its own special torture. You're standing sometimes, literally standing sometimes, sitting with your back to a tree trying to stay alert enough to detect threats while your body is screaming for sleep. Your eyes want to close, your brain wants to shut down. But falling asleep on guard duty is a court-martial offence punishable by execution in some armies, by flogging in others. Even if you escape official punishment, falling asleep means your entire section could die because you didn't see enemies approaching. The guilt potential keeps you awake almost as effectively as fear. Historians still argue whether medieval armies actually executed soldiers for sleeping on guard or if that was mostly threat-based discipline. The evidence is mixed. Some chronicles mention executions, others suggest more lenient punishments. Your company hasn't executed anyone yet, but you've seen men whipped for falling asleep, their backs opened by leather straps while the rest of the company watches and learns the lesson. The lesson is stay awake or suffer. Neither option is appealing. The microsleeps start around day 5. These are brief moments, seconds maybe, where your brain just shuts off without permission. You're standing there, eyes open, and suddenly you're not there anymore. You come back with a jerk, a gasp, no idea how long you were gone. Could be 3 seconds, could be 30. Your body swaying slightly is usually what wakes you the loss of balance, triggering some primitive alarm that you're about to fall. These micro-sleeps during guard duty are terrifying because you have no control over them. They just happen, your consciousness flickering like a dying candle. The sleep you do get is rarely restful. You're cold, so your body never fully relaxes. You're lying on frozen ground, so you wake every time you need to shift position, which is frequently. You're wearing all your clothes and armor because removing them means freezing, but sleeping in armor means nothing. Bends properly, nothing settles comfortably. Your gambeson bunches, your leather jerkin digs into your ribs. Your boots press against the depression walls you've dug. Every body part is in some level of discomfort, and your sleeping brain cycles through them, noticing each problem waking you slightly, letting you drift back down until the next problem surfaces. The dreams have become vivid and disturbing. Probably because your sleep is so light, you're spending more time in REM sleep, the stage where dreams happen, and less time in the deep restorative stages. You dream about food with hallucinatory intensity. Full feasts, tables loaded with roasted meat and bread and cheese and wine. You can taste it, smell it, feel the fat on your fingers. Then you wake up in your snow hollow with an empty stomach and the taste of disappointment so strong it's almost a flavour. You also dream about dying, repeatedly. Dreams where arrows hit you, where you're drowning in snow, where your fingers fall off like rotten fruit. These aren't nightmares in the traditional sense. They're too mundane, too close to your actual daily fears. They're rehearsals, your brain working through scenarios, preparing you for various ways this campaign could end badly. You wake from these dreams with your heart racing, momentarily unsure if you're dead or alive, if the arrow in your chest was real or imagined. Some men talk in their sleep. You've heard them murmuring conversations with people who aren't here, arguing with commanders, calling for mothers or wives. One archer regularly screams himself awake, thrashing in his depression, until someone kicks him quiet. Nobody mocks him for it. Everyone understands that sleep here is just another battlefield where you fight different enemies. The screamer's enemies happen to be particularly aggressive. Yours manifest as food dreams and death dreams. Everyone's struggling in their own way. The cumulative exhaustion affects everything. Your reaction time is slower. Your decision-making is impaired. Your mood is shorter, more irritable, more prone to irrational anger over small problems. You got into an argument yesterday about nothing. Someone stepped too close to your sleeping spot and you were ready to fight him. Actually fight over 6 inches of frozen ground. That's sleep deprivation talking, stripping away the social veneer that keeps humans from constant violence. Other men are experiencing the same deterioration. Fights break out over trivial matters. The sergeants break them up, but they can't break up the underlying exhaustion driving the aggression. The historical sleep pattern called segmented sleep, where people naturally woke in the middle of the night for an hour or two before sleeping again, is sometimes cited as evidence that modern sleep expectations are unusual. Maybe medieval people were adapted to interrupted sleep. Maybe they handled it better. Except the historical accounts of soldiers on campaign are full of references to exhaustion, to men falling asleep while marching to the desperate need for rest. So maybe segmented sleep worked fine in peaceful villages with warm beds, but this fractured, cold, terrified pseudo-sleep, this is destroying everyone equally, across historical periods. You're currently on the tail end of a 2-hour sleep period that was really more like 90 minutes of shivering semi-consciousness punctuated by food dreams. Soon someone will kick your boot to tell you it's guard time, and you'll drag yourself upright into the cold dark for another 2 hours of trying not to microsleep while watching for threats that may or may not exist. Then maybe you'll sleep again, or maybe there'll be a march, or maybe the enemy will attack and sleep will become irrelevant. You've stopped planning beyond the next guard shift. That's all the future you can handle. The urine strategy sounds barbaric until you're desperate enough to try it, and then it becomes just another survival technique in a campaign that's stripped away every pretense of dignity. You first heard about it from a veteran archer, a man who'd served in 3 winter campaigns, and still had most of his fingers, which made him either lucky or knowledgeable. He explained it matter-of-factly. Fresh urine is sterile, warm, and contains urea, which in high concentrations can help preserve tissue and prevent some infections. Whether the chemistry is accurate doesn't matter. What matters is the warmth. The mechanics are straightforward. When you need to urinate, which is less frequent than normal because you're chronically dehydrated, you don't just piss into the snow. You cup your hands and piss into them, letting the warm liquid pool in your palms, working your fingers through it, squeezing your hands together to distribute heat. The warmth is shocking, almost painful, as blood rushes back into tissue that's been cold too long. Your fingers tingle, then burn, then finally relax slightly. The relief lasts maybe 5 minutes before the cold returns, but those 5 minutes are worth the degradation. Some men piss on their bowstrings. The warmth helps restore flexibility temporarily, and there's a belief, possibly superstitious, possibly chemical, that urine protects the hemp fibres from moisture damage. You've seen archers holding their strings in cupped hands, while urinating over them faces set in expressions of grim determination. It looks absurd. It probably is absurd. But when absurdity provides even marginal advantage in staying alive, you embrace it. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers routinely used urine for medical or practical purposes, or whether it was desperate improvisation by men with no other options. Some medical texts from the period mention urine in various treatments, mostly as a diagnostic tool, but occasionally as a wound wash. Modern skeptics point out that urine, while sterile when it leaves the body, can still introduce problems if used carelessly. Medieval soldiers had no concept of germ theory, but had extensive experience with what worked and what didn't. The fact that the practice persisted suggests it helped more than it harmed. You've also started pissing on minor wounds. A cut on your hand from arrow fletching, a scrape on your knee from falling, anything that's broken skin gets a morning urine rinse. The logic is that it cleans the wound, and the warmth might prevent infection. Whether this is medically sound is irrelevant. What matters is that the wounds haven't festered yet, and you'll credit anything prayer-urine luck that's keeping you functional. The practice becomes routine, almost ritualized. Morning piss hands first, then bowstring if needed, then any wounds requiring tension. Evening piss, same sequence. You're basically medicating yourself with your own waste products, and the medieval irony isn't lost on you. You're so resource-deprived that even your excretions have become valuable. Nothing is wasted in winter warfare. Not food, not warmth, not even urine. Other bodily fluids get repurposed too. Some men collect their saliva to wet arrow fletching that's become too dry and brittle. Saliva contains enzymes that can help break down certain substances, though whether it helps feathers is questionable. Blood, when it's available from minor wounds, gets used to mark arrows, to write messages, to seal small cracks in leather, with the logic that blood coagulates and might act as adhesive. You're operating in an economy of body products, trading pieces of yourself for marginal improvements in survival odds. The psychological adjustment to these practices is surprisingly quick. First time you piss on your hands, you feel disgusted, ashamed, certain. This is rock bottom. By the third time, it's just a thing you do, like eating or sleeping. By week 2, you're explaining the technique to newer recruits who haven't discovered it yet, speaking with the authority of someone who survived long enough to know the tricks. The degradation that seemed unbearable becomes normal. That's perhaps the most disturbing part, how quickly humans adapt to circumstances that should be intolerable. The jokes start around day 10. Dark humour about becoming piss wizards, about having magic hands that brew their own healing potions, about the enemy being defeated not by arrows, but by the sheer indignity of English archers and their urine strategies. Gallows humour, but humour nonetheless. Laughing about it makes it slightly less miserable, transforms humiliation into camaraderie. You're all pissing on your hands together, which creates a strange bond. Shared degradation is apparently a team-building exercise. Some men refuse the practice on religious or personal grounds. They'd rather lose fingers than compromise their dignity this way. You respect the choice while thinking it's stupid. Dignity doesn't keep you warm. Pride doesn't preserve tissue. You've watched men with intact dignity lose functional body parts, and you've decided your values lie elsewhere. Your hands are more important than your self-image. That's a calculation you're comfortable with. The urine itself changes character over the campaign. Early on, when you were better hydrated and better fed, it was pale, copious, warm. Now it's darker, concentrated, less volume. Your kidneys are working with minimal input. You're drinking barely enough to stay alive, eating too little salt, too little everything. The urine is thicker, smells stronger, contains more waste products in less liquid. It's still warm enough to help, but the warmth doesn't last as long. Your body is economizing even its waste production. The thought occurs to you during the third consecutive night of guard duty, where the cold has become a physical presence crushing your chest, you could just walk away. Not dramatically, not as protest, just quietly slip into the forest during your watch and keep walking until the column is behind you and the war is someone else's problem. Desertion. The word carries weight, but the weight is lighter than the bow on your shoulder. Lighter than the knowledge that every day here is eroding parts of yourself that might not grow back. The mathematics of desertion are seductive. Behind you, a week's march back to something resembling civilization. Ahead, weeks more of this frozen hell, followed by battle that you'll probably survive but might not followed by the long march home anyway. The enemy you're supposed to fight isn't your enemy. He's just another cold, miserable conscript who wants to go home as much as you do. The nobles orchestrating this campaign are warm, somewhere eating real food, sleeping in beds. Why are you dying for their border disputes? The practical obstacles are substantial. First, you'd be deserting alone, which means no backup, no shared resources, no one to help if you collapse in the snow. Second, you're in enemy territory, or at least disputed territory, which means you're equally likely to encounter hostile forces as friendly villages. Third, you're wearing English archers' gear, which marks you as valuable to capture ransom, or kill, depending on who finds you. Fourth, and perhaps most pressing, you're already exhausted, underfed, and hypothermic. Your chances of successfully navigating back to safety alone are not promising. Historians still argue about desertion rates in medieval armies. Some sources suggest massive desertion armies losing half their strength to men who just walked away. Others suggest desertion was rare because the penalties were so severe and the practical difficulties so overwhelming. The truth probably varied by campaign, by season, by how well fed and paid the troops were. Your campaign's desertion rate is unknown to you. Men disappear, but whether they deserted, died, or got lost is often unclear. The penalty for desertion if caught ranges from flogging to execution depending on your commander's mood and need for examples. You've heard stories, probably apocryphal, possibly true, of deserters being hanged, where their bodies could be seen by the marching column, a reminder that leaving is worse than staying. Whether your commander would actually execute you is unclear. He needs archers. Dead archers can't shoot. But humiliated archers' backs opened by whips serve as powerful deterrents, while eventually returning to functional status. The social mathematics are complicated. Your reputation back home depends partly on completing your service. Deserters are marked men, everyone knows you ran, everyone judges you for it. Employment becomes difficult. Marriage prospects evaporate. You're the coward from the winter campaign, the man who abandoned his duty. On the other hand, dead men have excellent reputations and no employment prospects whatsoever because they're dead. The choice between tarnished honour and functional limbs seems obvious. But medieval social pressure is its own form of combat. Some men have already gone. You've noticed absences, archers who were here last week and aren't here now. Maybe they died quietly and nobody mentioned it. Maybe they slipped away during the chaos of the last skirmish. Maybe they're currently frozen in a ditch somewhere, regretting their decision in their final moments. The uncertainty is deliberate. Commanders don't announce desertion because acknowledging it encourages others to consider it. You've planned your desertion route hypothetically. During guard duty, you'd wait until your shift was nearly over, so the next guard wouldn't arrive for another few minutes. You'd walk into the trees as if investigating a sound, perfectly normal guard behaviour. Once out of sight, you'd keep walking, moving perpendicular to the column's line of march to avoid encountering either vanguard or rear guard. You'd need to put miles between yourself and the camp before dawn, which means night walking through forest, which is suicidal, but so is staying. The emotional barrier is stronger than the practical ones. You're not a deserter. You're a farmer who got pressed into service, who's trying to survive, who's following orders despite everything. Deserting means admitting defeat, admitting you can't endure what others are enduring. It means shame. And despite everything, despite the cold, the hunger, the fear, the damaged fingers, the chronic exhaustion, you're not ready to carry that shame yet. Pride is killing you, but it's keeping you here. Other archers talk about desertion in whispers, not planning it seriously, just acknowledging it as an option, the way you might acknowledge that jumping off a cliff is technically possible if falling seemed better than standing. These conversations are bonding moments, admitting that you're all thinking about it, all weighing the mathematics, all staying anyway, out of some combination of duty, fear, and inertia. Shared consideration of desertion is almost as effective as actual camaraderie. The men who have families waiting tend to stay. They've got reasons to survive and return. The men with nothing to return to are more dangerous, more likely to vanish. You fall somewhere in the middle. Your wife is waiting theoretically, though whether she'll wait indefinitely is uncertain. Your children need you, but they need you alive and functional, not dead or permanently damaged. Would they prefer a living coward father or a dead heroic one? You suspect the former, but you're not certain enough to test the hypothesis, so you stay. Not because you've rejected desertion intellectually, but because you haven't quite accepted it emotionally. Maybe tomorrow, maybe after the next battle, maybe when your fingers finally blacken beyond saving and you've got nothing left to lose. The decision stays open, a door you haven't walked through yet, but haven't closed either. It's comforting in its way, knowing you have that option, even if you're not ready to use it. The possibility of escape makes the present suffering slightly more bearable, which is probably why you're still here. The feast myth is perhaps the cruelest lie of military service. The promise that after battle, after victory, there will be celebration, abundance, reward. Officers speak of it during low moments, describing the roasted meat and bread and ale that awaits once you've accomplished your objectives. It's motivation wrapped in fantasy, a carrot dangling from a stick you're too exhausted to reach for. And like most military promises, it's substantially exaggerated when it's not outright false. You've survived, the skirmish survived is perhaps generous, you participated and didn't die, and now you're waiting for the feast that was promised. What arrives is the baggage cart, same as every evening, with the same tired ox and the same camp follower, ladling the same watery gruel from the same dented pot. There's slightly more of it tonight maybe. The chunks of the mystery meat are marginally larger. This is feast by medieval military standards portions that don't leave you actively starving, accompanied by an extra ration of ale that's only half frozen. The meat in tonight's stew is allegedly from a deer killed by a hunting party this morning. Allegedly. It could be deer, could be horse, could be something that died of natural causes and was opportunistically harvested before it froze solid. The taste is generic protein, no longer gamey or distinctive, just the flavour of meat that exists. You eat it without question because questions don't make you less hungry, and hunger is the baseline condition of your existence now. Historians still argue whether medieval armies actually provided feast-level provisions after victories or whether soldiers were perpetually underfed regardless of military success. Account books from some campaigns show increased spending after battles suggesting celebratory rations were real. Other sources describe soldiers perpetually scrounging and supplement hunting victory or not. Your experience suggests the truth lives between promise and reality. You get slightly more today, enough to notice, not enough to satisfy. The promised bread materializes as hard tack that's been stored so long, it's achieved a texture between wood and stone. You've learned to break it into small pieces and let them soften in the stew, rather than attempting to bite through directly. Some men still have all their teeth. You'd like to remain in that category. The bread is dark, dense, possibly nutritious, in ways you can't taste, because nutrition and flavour parted ways several weeks ago. The ale flows more freely tonight, which is the most tangible evidence of feast conditions. You receive 2 portions instead of 1, and the second portion goes down easier because you're slightly drunk by then, which dulls the cold and the pain, and the creeping awareness that tomorrow will be exactly like today except possibly worse. Other archers are getting rowdy. Drinking on empty stomachs amplifies alcohol's effects. Someone starts singing. Others join in voices rough but earnest songs about home and women and warmth, all the things that aren't here. The cheese appears as a surprise distribution, small wedges passed around rationed carefully, so everyone gets approximately equal portions. This is luxury. Real cheese harder than the usual rations, aged longer, possibly even good under circumstances where your palate hadn't been destroyed by weeks of deprivation. You eat it slowly, trying to make it last, trying to remember what flavour used to mean before everything tasted like survival. Some men are trading rations, exchanging ale for bread meat for cheese, creating a microeconomy around marginally increased provisions. You consider trading your second ale ration for extra meat but decide against it. The warmth from alcohol is immediate, the calories from meat are theoretical. Your body needs the psychological comfort of intoxication more than it needs 30 additional calories of protein that might be pigeon or might be rat. The feast, such as it is, lasts about 40 minutes. The time required to distribute rations, consume them, and realize you're still hungry despite having eaten more than usual. The satisfaction is brief. Your stomach, having received slightly more input than it expected, now remembers what actual satiation felt like and complains louder about its current state. You're somehow hungrier after the feast than you were before, which seems like a cruel physiological joke. Officers appear to make speeches, words about valour, about duty, about how proud the king would be if he knew what you'd accomplished today. The words wash over you like the wind, present but meaningless. The king is not here. The king's not cold. The king's opinion of your valour doesn't warm your fingers or fill your stomach. You nod at appropriate moments, make sounds of agreement, and think about how nobles define feast very differently than you do. The promised plunder, the other component of post-battle reward, is equally disappointing. The enemy you fought were as poor as you are. Their equipment was salvage, their pockets empty, their boots too damaged to be worth stealing. The only items worth taking were their arrows, which have already been collected and redistributed. You gained 6 arrows from the engagement, which helps your personal deficit but doesn't feel like plunder. Plunder implies wealth, excess, treasure. This is just resource reallocation among the equally desperate. Some officers apparently ate better. There are rumours of roasted fowl, of white bread, of wine instead of ale. These rumours circulate through the camp like ghost stories, unverifiable but persistent. Whether they're true doesn't matter. Believing that someone somewhere is eating well after the battle you all fought creates resentment that simmers alongside hunger. The feast stratifies along class lines. Nobles feast, soldiers get slightly less inadequate rations and call it celebration. You bed down that night with a stomach that's marginally fuller and a mood that's somehow worse. The feast revealed the gap between promise and reality, between what victory should provide and what it actually delivers. Tomorrow you'll march again, fight again possibly, and the promise of future feasts will ring hollow, because you've seen what feast means in this context. It means you get to be slightly less hungry while remaining fundamentally miserable. That's the reward. That's what you're fighting for. The religion here isn't the formal ceremony of Sunday services back home. It's desperate, transactional, and entirely focused on survival. You've started praying more frequently, not from sudden piety, but from the mathematical certainty that you've exhausted all practical solutions and need to petition higher powers because lower powers have demonstrably failed you. Prayers cheap, cost nothing, and might work. In your current economy of resources that makes it a rational investment, the prayers are specific transactional, not "thy will be done," but "please let my fingers work tomorrow, and don't let that arrow hit me, and help me not freeze to death tonight." You're negotiating with God like he's a quartermaster who might spare extra rations if properly petitioned. Other men pray similarly. You hear them at night, whispered conversations with saints, with the Virgin Mary, with Christ himself, asking for intervention in matters of frostbite and enemy arrows, and finding the path home. Some archers carry relics, chips of bone allegedly from saint splinters of wood, supposedly from the true cross fragments of cloth that once touched something holy. These relics are traded, sold, stolen, and treasured with an intensity that suggests genuine belief mixed with desperate superstition. A man with a relic has protection theoretically. Whether the protection is spiritual or psychological doesn't matter if it keeps him fighting when he should collapse. You don't have a relic, which either means you're more rational or more doomed, depending on perspective. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers were genuinely pious, or simply performing expected religious behaviours. The evidence suggests both deep belief coexisting with pragmatic superstition. Men who sincerely believed in Christ's protection also wore lucky charms and performed rituals that had more in common with folk magic than Christianity. The line between religion and superstition blurred on campaign everything becoming part of a larger system of managing the unmanageable. The priest attached to your company performs services when circumstances allow, which is rarely. He's a thin man who looks as cold and hungry as everyone else, his vestments worn over the same inadequate winter clothing, his fingers too stiff to make proper blessing gestures. He conducts abbreviated masses, no communion, because there's no bread or wine to spare, just prayers and absolution for sins you're about to commit again tomorrow. The services are brief, functional spiritual efficiency for men who might die before the next opportunity for formal worship. You've confessed sins you never would have admitted in peacetime. Theft, you stole an extra portion of bread when distribution was chaotic. Violence, you hit another archer during an argument, drew blood, felt satisfaction about it. Impure thoughts, you've imagined murdering your sergeant multiple times with detail, with pleasure. The priest grants absolution with the weariness of someone who's heard worse and knows the circumstances excuse much. Your sins are petty compared to the fundamental sin of this campaign. Rich men sending poor men to freeze and kill each other over territory none of them will ever own. The superstitions multiply in the absence of control. Don't sleep with your boots pointing toward enemy territory, it invites death. Always knock your arrow with the cock feather pointing away from the bear, reversed arrows bring bad luck. Never whistle at night, it attracts evil spirits or wolves or enemy scouts, depending on who's explaining the prohibition. Touch the tree before shooting it brings accuracy. Spit on your hands after waking it ensures they'll work properly. These rituals are probably nonsense. You perform them anyway because the alternative is admitting you have no control whatsoever, and that admission is more terrifying than the rituals are embarrassing. The fire has become sacred in ways that transcend practical warmth. Men gather round it not just for heat, but for something approaching worship. The fire is lifelike hope, the only thing in this frozen forest that pushes back against the cold and dark. You've watched men stare into flames with expressions of religious devotion, faces illuminated by flickering light eyes, reflecting something like faith. The fire doesn't judge, doesn't demand, just gives warmth to anyone close enough impartial and constant. If God is anywhere in this forest, he's probably in that fire. Some prayers are communal, spoken by groups of archers huddled together. The Lord's Prayer repeated in English and sometimes Latin, words running together from repetition and cold, and the general degradation of speech when your mouth barely works. The prayers create rhythm, shared breath, synchronized sound that's comforting, even if the words have lost individual meaning. You're praying together, which means you're together, which is its own form of salvation, in a campaign designed to isolate and destroy you individually. The belief in miracles hasn't died despite considerable evidence that miracles are not forthcoming. Men still speak of divine intervention, the arrow that should have hit but didn't, the frostbite that should have blackened but cleared the food that arrived exactly when starvation seemed imminent. These are probably coincidences, natural variations in otherwise consistent suffering. But calling them miracles provides meaning, suggests that someone is watching, that your suffering has been noted and occasionally ameliorated by higher powers. The alternative, that no one is watching, that suffering is random and meaningless, is too bleak to entertain. You've made bargains with God that you probably can't keep. Let me survive this campaign and I'll never complain about hardship again. Get me home and I'll attend every service, contribute to the church, live piously. These promises are sincere in the moment of desperation and will probably be forgotten the moment you're comfortable again. God presumably knows this, understands that foxhole conversions are temporary, and either accepts the sincerity of temporary faith or doesn't exist to care. Either way, making the bargains feels necessary, feels like you're doing something. And doing something is better than passive acceptance of whatever comes. Victory, when it finally comes, feels nothing like the songs promised. There's no glorious charge, no decisive moment of triumph, no clarity about who won and who lost. What happens is the enemy stops appearing, the skirmishes cease, and after 3 days of nervous waiting, word comes down that the campaign objectives have been achieved. You're marching home, or rather you're marching back toward where home theoretically is, through the same frozen forest along the same routes, except now you're doing it with fewer men and more damage. The casualties become visible during the muster for departure. Your company of 200 archers has maybe 140 remaining. 60 men gone, some dead, some too wounded to march. Some disappeared into desertion or captivity or frozen ditches. The survivors look like animated corpses, hollow-eyed, gaunt, moving with the stiffness of people whose joints no longer bend properly. You probably look the same. There are no mirrors in frozen forests, which is probably merciful. The march home is paradoxically harder than the march in. You're weaker now, more damaged, less fed, carrying the accumulated exhaustion of weeks without proper rest. Your feet have deteriorated beyond anything you thought feet could become while still technically functioning. The blisters have blisters. The frostbite has progressed. Your boots are held together by hope, an improvised stitching with sinew you don't want to think about too carefully. Each step is negotiation between momentum and collapse. Historians still argue whether medieval armies maintained discipline during withdrawals or devolved into disorganized retreats. Your experience is somewhere between. There's still a column, still officers shouting orders, but the formation is loose, the pace erratic, and everyone understands that we're not marching towards something anymore, we're marching away. The psychological difference is substantial. Forward marching had purpose, however grim. Backward marching just has distance to cover. The landscape looks different on the return journey, though it's objectively the same forest. The trees seem closer together, more oppressive. The paths seem longer. The cold seems colder, though that's probably your body's declining ability to generate heat rather than actual temperature change. You're seeing the forest through the lens of what it cost you, and everything looks hostile now, personal, like the forest itself collaborated in your destruction. Some men don't make it back. You watch them fall, first to their knees, then to their sides, then they stop moving. Sometimes others help them up, drag them forward for a while. Eventually the helpers are too exhausted to continue helping, and the fallen stay fallen. You pass bodies from your own company men who gave up or gave out lying in the snow, in positions that suggest they just decided sitting was better than walking, and never revise that decision. No one has energy to bury them. The forest will handle disposal. The enemy has apparently withdrawn too, which means you're not being pursued, which is the only good news. But it also means the forest is empty of threats, which makes every sound more suspicious, because there's no legitimate explanation for noise. Your paranoia has been calibrated to wartime and doesn't adjust easily to peace. You jump at branches falling, you spin toward wind sounds, your nerves are stripped raw, firing at everything because they've forgotten how to distinguish threat from normalcy. Food remains inadequate, but slightly more available as supply lines catch up to the returning column. The rations improve from starvation rations to insufficient rations. Still not enough, but enough that you're not actively dying anymore, just chronically depleted. Your body doesn't know what to do with this marginal increase. Your stomach cramps, your digestion revolts. You're so adapted to deprivation that sufficiency feels like illness. The temperature is moderating slightly as you march south, though moderating means merely freezing instead of lethal. You can feel your face again, which means you can feel the damage to your face. Your nose is tender, possibly frostbitten, but recovering. Your cheeks are raw. Your lips are split in multiple places and bleed when you try to smile, which you don't because there's nothing to smile about, and smiling uses muscles that have forgotten their purpose. The small victories accumulate a night where you sleep 3 consecutive hours, a morning where your fingers bend without excruciating pain, a day where no one dies within your visual range. These aren't victories in the martial sense. You're not conquering, not achieving objectives, not accomplishing anything except continued existence. But continued existence is the victory that matters, and you're achieving it incrementally, day by day, mile by mile. You start thinking about home in concrete terms rather than abstract longing. Your house, your bed, your wife's face, the taste of bread she bakes, which is probably not objectively better than any other bread, but will taste like salvation after weeks of hard tack. Your children who will have grown in your absence, who might not recognize you immediately because you're gaunt and damaged and marked by experience in ways that show. The other archers are thinking similar thoughts, you can tell by the conversations, which have shifted from complaints about present suffering to speculation about future normalcy. First thing I'm doing is sleeping for 3 days. I'm never being cold again. I'm going to eat until I vomit and then eat more. These aren't sophisticated plans. They're simple desires for basic comfort, and they sustain everyone more effectively than the officers' speeches ever did. The conclusion you're reaching slowly is that you survived. Not gloriously, not heroically, not in any way that will generate songs or stories. You survive the way insects survive winter, by enduring, by shutting down non-essential functions, by accepting damage as the cost of not dying. Your body's worse, your mind is worse, your hands are worse, your feet are worse, your faith in human endeavour is worse. But you're alive, moving toward home, and that's apparently what victory looks like from ground level. The ones who actually survived, truly survived, not just didn't die yet survived, had specific things in common, and those things had almost nothing to do with archery skill. You've had weeks of marching to observe patterns, to notice which men were still functional, while others collapsed to identify the variables that separated continued existence from becoming another frozen casualty the column passed without stopping. Luck was the primary factor, and luck is not a skill you can train. The archer who stood 2 feet left of where an arrow landed survived. The one who stood where the arrow landed didn't. The man whose boots happened to fit properly kept his toes. The man whose boots were slightly too small lost 3 toes to constriction and frostbite. The soldier who got adequate rations because the distribution started at his end of the line maintained strength. The soldier at the wrong end got short portions and weakened systematically. Luck determined almost everything, which is perhaps the most disturbing conclusion of all. Your survival was mostly random, not earned. But within the narrow band of things, you could control certain behaviours correlated with survival. The men who stayed survived better than the men who gave up. Obvious maybe, but you watch the moment of surrender happen in various archers, a look in their eyes, a slackness in their posture, a cessation of small defensive behaviours. They stopped trying to stay warm, stopped competing for fire access, stopped eating their full rations. These men died within days, not from any acute injury, but from having decided consciously, or not, that continuation required more effort than they could muster. The ones who survived were often the ones too stupid or stubborn to recognise when quitting was rational. Community mattered more than individual capability. The archers who paired up, who shared body heat, who watched each other's backs and pulled each other upright when someone fell, they survived at higher rates than the isolationists. You noticed this. You participated in it eventually after your pride eroded enough to admit you needed help staying alive. The man you partnered with a farmer from somewhere north, you never learned exactly where is still alive, and you're still alive, and the correlation isn't coincidental. 2 people can generate more warmth than one, can take turns staying alert, can notice when the other is sliding toward hypothermia or despair and intervene. Prior experience with hardship was a significant predictor. The archers who'd known hunger before, who'd survived bad winters in childhood, who came from poor families where deprivation was normal, they adapted faster than the archers from relatively comfortable backgrounds. Your own childhood involved sufficient poverty that this campaign's suffering wasn't entirely foreign. You'd been cold before, you'd been hungry before. Not like this, not this intensely or prolonged, but your body had a framework for understanding deprivation and didn't panic when resources disappeared. Other men facing genuine deprivation for the first time struggled psychologically in ways that translated to physical failure. Historians still argue whether medieval populations were generally hardy from lifelong hardship, or whether campaigns like this killed indiscriminately regardless of background. Your observation suggests both hardship provided some advantage, but extreme hardship overwhelmed everyone eventually. The men from comfortable backgrounds died slightly faster. The men from impoverished backgrounds died slightly slower. Everyone was dying. The rate varied. Small habits made disproportionate differences. The archers who maintained their equipment daily checking bowstrings, inspecting arrows, repairing clothing immediately when tears appeared, kept functional longer than those who let maintenance slide. This seems obvious, but wasn't universally practiced. When you're exhausted, when every action requires enormous effort, the temptation to skip maintenance is powerful. The men who resisted that temptation, who forced themselves to care for equipment even when caring for themselves seemed barely possible, retained combat effectiveness longer. Similarly, the men who managed their feet survived at higher rates, changing into dry wrappings when possible, even if dry meant slightly less wet, massaging feet at night to maintain circulation, checking for blisters and treating them immediately rather than waiting until infection set in. These small acts of foot maintenance probably saved more archers than combat skill ever did. You can't march on destroyed feet, and marching was 90% of the campaign. Mental flexibility was another survival factor you noticed. The archers who could adapt tactics, who weren't rigid about how things should be done, who adopted the urine warming technique and the communal sleeping, and the various degrading but effective strategies they survived. The men who insisted on maintaining peacetime standards of dignity, who refused to lower themselves to survival tactics they considered beneath them, often didn't make it. Pride was a luxury the frozen forests couldn't support. The survivors were the ones who recognized this and adjusted their pride accordingly. Religious faith helped some men, but not others. The deeply faithful sometimes survived through pure belief-driven will, convinced God would preserve them if they endured faithfully. The equally faithful sometimes died because they accepted death as God's will and didn't fight it aggressively enough. Faith was neutral as a survival factor. What mattered was how faith manifested in behavior. If faith made you fight harder, it helped. If faith made you passively accept suffering, it killed you. Age played a complex role. Very young archers, teenagers, often died from inexperience and insufficient judgment about when to push and when to conserve energy. Very old archers, anyone over 40, often died from accumulated wear on bodies that couldn't handle additional stress. The survival sweet spot seemed to be mid-20s to mid-30s, old enough to have judgment, young enough to have resilience. You're 32, which apparently is optimal age for frozen forest warfare. Congratulations. The final factor which you're only recognizing now as the campaign ends and you're still alive was capacity for disconnection. The archers who survived were often the ones who could mentally separate from their body's suffering. Not ignore it, you can't ignore frostbite, but observe it from slight distance, treat pain as information rather than emergency. This is possibly a trauma response, a dissociative coping mechanism that will have consequences later, but in the immediate term, the ability to experience suffering without being overwhelmed by it meant you kept functioning when function seemed impossible. You survived, your partner survived, maybe half the company survived. The ones who didn't were unlucky or gave up or lacked community or couldn't adapt or were too young, too old, too proud, too faithful in the wrong way. The survivors aren't necessarily better, just luckier, and slightly more willing to do whatever degrading, desperate thing survival required. That's the truth. No one wants to acknowledge survival in winter warfare had almost nothing to do with martial valor and everything to do with becoming the kind of animal that doesn't die easily, even when dying seems preferable to continuing. The wind is fading now, easing into something softer, less aggressive, as if the forest itself is tired of fighting and ready to rest. You can feel the tension leaving your shoulders, not all of it, never all of it, but enough that your breathing comes slightly easier, enough that the cold seems less personal, more like weather and less like malice. You're walking still, but the walking has changed character. It's no longer the desperate march towards survival, but something closer to a return, a slow unfolding back toward the world you left behind. Your feet still hurt. They'll hurt for months, probably, maybe forever. But the pain is familiar now, almost companionable. A reminder that you're still feeling things, still here, still moving forward through time and space. The trees are thinning ahead, opening into clearings where light falls differently, where the air tastes less of ice and more of distance. You can imagine almost the moment when the forest ends and something else begins a road, a village, a place where fires burn in hearths and people sleep in beds, and winter is an inconvenience rather than an enemy. It's not close yet, but it's closer than it was, and that's enough. Your bow is still with you, weight familiar against your palmwood that knows your grip as well as you know its shape. The arrows rattle softly in the quiver. Your fingers are damaged but moving. Your breath makes clouds that dissipate slowly into the darkening air. You're here, you're still here. And tomorrow you'll be here again, slightly closer to home, slightly further from the frozen forest that tried so hard to keep you. The night is coming, but gently now, without urgency, settling over the column like a blanket that's almost warm. You'll sleep tonight in your shallow depression, wrapped in your inadequate cloak, but you'll sleep knowing that each sleep brings you closer to the sleep that comes in safety, in warmth, in the presence of people who love you enough to have waited. The story of the frozen forest and the archers who walk through it is ending not with triumph, not with glory, but with the simple, profound fact of continuation. You continued. You're still continuing. And that's enough. That's always been enough. Rest now, friend. Let the forest fade. Let the cold release its grip. Tomorrow is another march, but tonight you've earned this rest. Close your eyes. The world will still be here when you wake. The story ends here. See you in the next video. Good night.